Welcome, everyone, to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Thursday, so it is I don't know if it's a special edition, but we're going to talk.
Always special when I can do a show with you, Vince.
Oh, you know all the right things to say. You're such a romantic. So
you just made it weird. Let's rock and roll.
That's what I do. When there's a line, I just leap over it. I don't play with the line.
You're a habitual line stepper.
I am a line stepper.
I understand it.
But today we are going to do our final defensive positional breakdown, and we're going to talk safeties today. And this, Brian, is a very interesting position. And we're going to kind of get into that here in the introduction as to why it's an interesting position going from last year and then, morphing into this year. And then obviously we know that it's been a buzzword in recruiting and all of these different things, right? And so this is an interesting one that we kind of saved till last, kind of on purpose. But there's a lot of intrigue to the safety position, especially going into this year, obviously in the future, but that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about the 23 version of the safeties. There's a lot to be excited about, but then there's also a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's what makes it strange, right? Like when you evaluate the safeties, and I've tried to do a lot of just kind of looking back at the season during the offseason and looking back to what was okay. It's like my opinion of JD Bertrand. All right, let me just make sure that I'm not like getting nostalgic and I'm going back and breaking down the film and feeling a certain way about the receiving core. Was that an emotional response during the season? Go back and watch the film. No, they were doing better than their numbers show. All those type of things you kind of get into, and you try to make sure that your things are fresh and that your opinions are accurate and all that type of stuff. But then you look at the safeties and you're just like, it's a weird position to evaluate because they weren't bad last year. They also weren't good either. They were just kind of there.
Right.
They didn't give up a lot of big plays. There were some, right, in the numbers that will manifest itself. They didn't get burned a ton on deep balls in the pass game. The safeties didn't anyway. There were times, but not. Sure. It wasn't really that often.
Right.
But then the other part of it too is they just didn't make a lot of plays. And it's just this really weird dichotomy of who they are is, they're not a bad unit, but they're not a good unit either.
Mm-hmm.
And this year they've got to be a good unit. I mean, you look at the numbers last year, and according to Pro Football Focus, Ramon Henderson only gave up 183 yards passing, but he allowed an 81.8 completion percentage. Looking at DJ Brown, he allowed 15 of 22 for 68.2, only allowed 144 yards, but very high completion percentage. Brandon Joseph, 11 of 17, 64.7. Houston Griffith was only 5 of 10. He didn't give up a lot of plays, didn't make any plays. And then Xavier Watts was the only one who kept people sub 500, which is partly what we're going to get into, but right. They didn't have a lot of production either. I mean, they're when you look at interceptions, I think Brandon Joseph had 2 last season, I believe. Maybe actually he might have had 1 called back. I know he had 2 against Syracuse, but I thought he did have one of those called
Definitely
back.
Had the one.
Only had 1, but
yeah,
that was the only
very important
was
one.
The only interception that the safeties had all year.
Yeah.
Now Brandon Joseph did have one that was negated by a penalty against Syracuse. Then you look at pass breakups. DJ Brown had 2. Brandon Joseph had 1. Xavier Watts had 3. So Xavier Watts had half the pass breakup. So that's 7 passes defensed in an entire season.
Yeah.
That's terrible. That Harrison Smith had that many receptions in 1 season.
Mm-hmm.
And so you look at it and you say, boy, they didn't have a lot of bad plays, some misfits in the run game. They didn't have a lot of bad plays in the pass game. They didn't make any plays either. They were just kind of there. And that'll get you so far. That'll get you to 9-3, right? In my opinion, maybe 10-2. But if you're going to be a playoff team, you need your safeties to not only not be bad. Like the goal for a unit at Notre Dame isn't to don't suck, right?
Right.
They didn't. I mean, they were a quality unit. They did their job. There's merit to that. There's praise that needs to be heaped on doing your job.
Sure.
But to be a starter at a place like Notre Dame, to be a unit at a place like Notre Dame where you're trying to compete for championships, you have to produce more. And that's something that you have to look at. Now, there's a whole lot of reasons for it. Some of it's talent related, some of it's defensive related. They're sort of the last wave of defense, the way that Al Golden used them at times, where they're not going to be in position to make a lot of plays. But then there was other times where they were, and it's not a coincidence that as soon as Xavier Watts gets put in the lineup, he starts making plays on the football, right? It's not a coincidence. They didn't change the defense.
Right.
A guy that was, better at it. So this season, Vince, as you look at the safeties, the production has to be better. And there's, to me, when you're talking about safeties, production is in three, really four ways, the way that Notre Dame is going to use them. The lowest way is, quarterback pressure, sacks, things like that.
Sure.
They're occasionally going to corner fire, and that's all fine and dandy, right? The other way is you need more disruptive plays behind the line of scrimmage. When you look at the safeties last year, you had 2 tackles from loss from Xavier Watts, 2 from Ramon Henderson, 1 from Houston Griffith, and a half from DJ Brown, 5.5. Another example of just mediocre production.
Right. Yep.
And then, of course, there's pass breakups and interceptions. So just in those, it's the second, third, and fourth, especially in the order that I gave them, you're going to need a lot more production this year. You're going to need some more stops behind the line of scrimmage or at the line of scrimmage. You're going to need more disruptives in the pass game. Now, part of that should be, hey, you're year 2 in the system. There should be some of that. The other part of that is proper alignment. And this, Vince, at this level, when you're playing Ohio State, if you're supposed to be lined up right here and you're 6 inches off, that's the difference between you giving up a 25-yard completion and you making an interception or a pass breakup.
Sure.
I mean, it is literally that significant. I remember having a conversation one time with Mike Elko, and he was explaining this. He was like, talking about a big pass play they gave up against Stanford. And he's like, yeah, the safety was lined up 6 inches off. And I thought he was joking with me, right? I'm like, and he's like, no, seriously. And he explains the play, and I go back and watch it. I'm like, holy crap. Like he's absolutely correct. Right, he's absolutely correct. That's that he just that little bit against the better teams on your schedule or even decent players can be that different. So all of that comes from just being in the system longer. But being in the system longer doesn't get you from 6 pass breakups to 20 or 15 or whatever the case may be. And so those are the areas where you're just going to have to see more production, and hopefully they can get to it. I don't think it's going to be a situation where they're going to make 20, pass breakups and things like that. That's not really what we're talking about. But if you look at 2018, for example, and you look at the safety rotation, Jalen Elliott and Alohi Gilman just by themselves in 2018 had 12 just by themselves, right? And that was a year where you had Julian Love and Troy Pride had 26 combined, which is more than the entire cornerback room had last year. Nick Coleman had 4. So that's 16. Houston Griffith had 2. That's 18. Trying to look down here and see if there's any other safety. I mean, so 18. So, yeah, that's kind of 15 or 15 plus is where we need to be on pass breakups.
Sure.
And then you look at interceptions that year. Jalen Elliott had 4. Nick Coleman had 1. Alohi Gilman had 2. That's 7. So you're talking about 20 plus passes defensed from the safety position compared to 7. I think that puts in context sort of what we're talking about here, about the lack of production that we saw from this group. And, the tackle for loss numbers weren't a whole lot different than what they were now, which is, again, but that was a different kind of defense. They didn't trigger the safeties as much as they do now.
They do, yeah.
So those are just areas where you look at and say, again, they weren't a bad group last year. You bring back just about everybody that was, that made plays for you last year. You lose Houston Griffith. He was just solid, did his job kind of guy. Sure. You lose Brandon Joseph, who sometimes was pretty good and sometimes was your worst safety. Let's be honest.
Mm-hmm.
You bring in Antonio Carter. You bring in 2 freshmen. So it's going to have a little bit of a new look, but at the same time, it's the safety tandem we saw at the end of the year. I mean, or the safety trio we saw at the end of the year. Once Brandon Joseph kind of checked out, this was your trio, right? Mm-hmm. Xavier Watts, Ramon Henderson, DJ Brown.
Yep.
Now it's up to Chris O'Leary and Al Golden to figure out ways to get more production from this group. Right. And a big part of that's going to be certain players stepping up, which we'll dive into. But it's a very weird position to evaluate, Vince. It really is. Because I watch them play and I'm just like, there's not a lot to complain about as far as just like, oh, what a terrible play. Like DJ Brown had a really bad fit on a run against UNLV that helped spring open that 7-yard run. Like took another dude out, just really bad angle. There's a couple plays like that, but those are going to happen. But then you're just watching like, but dude, until Xavier Watts became a regular, they just didn't make any plays either.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that's got to improve a ton.
Completely agree. And I am as I sat back this morning and I was thinking about this position group and kind of the direction that we were going to go, and I always think about, okay, how was it last year and what am I projecting for this year? And it's like, for the first time since we've been doing these position breakdowns, it was like I had more questions in my head than I had answers. And there are some things that I'm pretty certain are going to happen. And then I tiered it out in my head, right? So it's like there's things that I'm certain are going to happen. There's things that I hope and could possibly happen, and then there's things that I just have no freaking clue. You know what I mean? And we're going to start breaking down the guys individually, and the first guy we're going to talk about is Xavier Watts, and you kind of touched on it when you were talking about when he was inserted in the lineup, then plays started to be made, at least at the safety position, more so than they were before he was a regular in the lineup. I'll put it that way. And I would say that the things that I'm certain about pretty much begin and end with Xavier Watts. Like that, for me personally, like I feel like I know that he's going to take that next step and be a dynamic safety. But we both know, and anybody that understands football knows, and our chat are those people, and the fans are mostly those people. You need more than one safety to be effective in any defense, right? And this defense asks the safeties to do a lot. So, while I'm very confident in what Xavier Watts is going to bring to the table, Batman needs a Robin, man. Like he needs to find somebody to just take that next spot. So obviously we're going to talk about Xavier Watts and what you think about him, what I think about him, that whole thing. But then as we move forward after that, though, it's like, that's where my questions start to come up.
I agree with what you said, but let me throw a little bit of a different angle out to your Vince.
Okay.
You talk about Batman needs a Robin, but Batman needs to be Batman first, right?
Agreed.
And that's the thing with Xavier is sometimes it's not about, what are your teammates doing to help you? It's what are you doing to help your teammates?
Sure.
Right. And that's, to me, that's a big part of when I look at Xavier and I evaluate his play. There's some things in there that he did last season that I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
And where you're saying like, that's the dude that we all thought he could be.
Sure.
Right. Like that's the guy that when you talk about Xavier Watts, that's the guy. That's why I graded him out as a top 100 football player coming out of high school. Now I thought he'd be doing it at receiver, but we also said when they signed him that, this is a kid that to me can do more than that. He's not just that. And so you want to see that kind of consistent production from him. We saw flashes of it last year.
Sure.
The last, what was it, 4 games, he had 8 tackles against Navy, had 9 against USC, and had some really big breakups against USC. He only had 2 tackles against Boston College, but I think they were both, like one of them was a tackle for loss, when you look at his production last season, when he got more than 20 snaps in a game, it's like, there's some things to really like about the things that he did last season. So, Xavier Watts is a guy that has the potential to be a really productive football player for Notre Dame. Now it's about just go out and do it, and then that's going to be the big key for him is he did some nice things last year, but he's got to be better than he was last year.
Absolutely.
He's got to be more consistent. So, for example, when you look at Xavier Watts and you say, hey, those 2 really impressive pass breakups that he had against USC last season, well, one of those needed to be picked off. It needed to be picked off. You've got to make that play. And that's what kind of like next level players get to. You look at the production he had down the stretch and you say, hey, look, if you could be that guy on a more consistent basis, you now make things better. Because the things I like about what he did last year, he was by far their most disruptive safety. I mean, he had 3 pass breakups last season, which is literally half of the unit's entire production last season. Right. But when you look at, the number of snaps, he was 3rd on the defense in number of snaps, but him and Houston Griffith and Ramon Henderson were all kind of in like that same 300 something category. And so you say, hey, look, he's showing up the potential to be a disruptive player, but even then he's got to make more plays. Now here's what I liked about what I did see from Xavier Watts that has me most fired up. He was their best run defender last year, and I don't think it was close. He is a really good come down in the alley type of guy. if you look at the Pro Football Focus numbers last season, and they do this thing called run stops, right? And the way they define it is a tackle that constitutes a failure for the offense, and that can get into like if it's third down and you stop them short of the first down marker. Sure. It can be like first and 10. It's got to be like less than 4 yards, depending on. I mean, I don't know how they measure it, but he had 13. The next closest last season was Brandon Joseph with 7. And Brandon Joseph played like almost 70 snaps more than Xavier Watts. So that's a part of it. So not only was he your most disruptive player in the pass game in 2 categories, most impacts plays on the ball, three passes defense more than anybody else that they had. He also held opponents to sub 500, sub 50% in completion percentage, only safety to do that. And then he was also your best run defender. Right. So he's athletic. He's strong. He's instinctive. He's just one of those kids, Vince, you look at and you say, he's not going to go to the combine and run a 4.4, I don't think. But his other athletic numbers are going to be impressive to a degree. But even then, he's not going to be a combine warrior. He's a football player. And this is what I've always said about Xavier Watts. He's not going to be a guy that goes to some camp and blows you away. Put the pads on that kid and let him go play football, and you're going to be like, wow, this kid's a good – he's not real big. He's like 5'11", 200. He's not a 4.4 guy. He's a really athletic kid, but not a guy that's going to have like a 40-plus inch vertical jump. He just knows how to play football. And that's something, honestly, that they've lacked at safety. They've had, good athletes and guys that are smart, but not guys that are just, man, that guy's a football player. And Xavier brings that. And if he can be disruptive, if he can take that, here's the key. You got to take that disruption, and it's got to be a more consistent aspect of your game. Xavier was really flashy last year in this area that we're talking about, right? There were just some moments where you're like, wow, that guy's a really good football player. I mean, he finished 7th on the defense and tackles last year. I think it was like 24 of his 39 tackles came in 3 games, right? There's got to be more consistency there. And that's what we need to see from Xavier, because if he becomes more disruptive and teams start saying, hey, we got to not throw at number 0, that's his new number.
Right.
Then that allows Al Golden, like the more players you have that teams have to game plan around, the better it is for you as a coordinator, because you can then say, hey, I'm going to put this guy in a situation where they have to throw to him.
Correct.
Or I know that they're going to go after this guy in this look. We know they like to throw in this matchup. So I'm going to have Xavier, because Notre Dame doesn't do anything with their corners to kind of, match up personnel wise. It's easier to do that with your safeties. There's just less room to travel, which is part of it. But you can go into a game and say, hey, Xavier, you're going to be playing the field this week because we like this matchup. We want to, they like to go with this guy, and you're our best cover guy, and we're going to do this. Or you can have him into the boundary, whatever. You can do a lot of different things with him, Vince. And that's something that you look at and say, if he can be that consistent disruptive player, then you can utilize him that way. And now all of a sudden, if he's doing more of the get him in space, get him in coverage, and you can trust that he's going to be consistent, then all of a sudden you're in situations where you can now protect the other safety position a little bit better. And you can use him a little bit differently. And so those are all just parts of what go into when you talk about this is why he needs to be that guy first. I don't want to talk about, hey, this guy needs to step up so that to help Xavier. No, Xavier needs to step up and be that guy first and foremost. And if he can be that and be a guy that can make those kind of plays, then all of a sudden you've got a foundation to build on. And that's my whole point right there, Vince, is there's not that one guy that right now we look at and say, that's the guy you're building around. That's your guy, like Alohi Gilman was,
right.
Like Harrison Smith was, like Kyle Hamilton was. You don't have that guy in the secondary. Xavier needs to be that guy. And if you're someone who read the intel piece that we put up, it sounds like he's getting there. And now it's, because here's the thing, when Xavier's dominating workouts, you start getting excited because is gonna when the pads come on, he's gonna play. And so that's just what we need to see. But he needs to be that guy. To me, he could be one of the biggest. And I'm going to have that X Factors article here coming out in the next week, Vince, that you gave me an idea for. He's probably one of the biggest X factors on defense.
Agreed.
And I think it's hilarious that his name is, they call him X.
Right.
But It's just it's no
too
pun
easy.
intended.
Yeah, I mean, it's too easy.
No pun intended. But if he can be that, because right now Notre Dame has disruptive players on all the level 1 and level 2. Level 2 for me is corners. The way that Notre Dame plays, I don't count corners as level 3. I get in normal football terminology
General
that's
terms.
true.
Right.
But for the way Notre Dame plays with the man covers they play, you could argue maybe Cam Hart's a level 3 player because they'll play him more off man. But those guys are making plays on level 1 and level 2 when you watch the games. I mean,
watch the Clemson game.
Bingo. and so to me, Vince, I'm talking about from like a structural standpoint, right? An alignment standpoint. They don't have that guy on level 3 right now.
Agreed.
If Xavier can be that guy, then all of a sudden your defense becomes a lot better. Right. A lot better. If he's not that guy and it's just another year of they're just okay,
sure,
that's not going to be a problem in 9-10 games this year.
Mm-hmm.
It's going to be harder to stop Ohio State if your safeties aren't dudes. And what happened last year? That was the one game Brandon Joseph played like the guy we thought he was going to be when they signed him.
Got us all excited about it too,
cool,
by the
I'm
way.
Done.
Yeah.
I mean, and we just really didn't see anything again until late in the year when Xavier stepped into the, I shouldn't say stepped in the lineup because he played against North Carolina, played a lot against Stanford, played a lot against Syracuse. It's just he started getting more comfortable and making more plays. Now, is that just kind of got hot or is that the new normal for him? We're going to find that out, but they need it to be the new normal and they need him to take some of those pass breakups and turn them into picks and take some of those tackling the guy as soon as he catches it and turn those into pass breakups. That's the next level for Xavier. And if he can get there, this defense is going to have a chance to be really good. We know what they got on the perimeter. They just got to get that back end figured out and be more productive.
Something that you said that resonated for me was that we can't just be worried about him being good for him anymore. Now he's a leader and has to be good and bring other guys with him. And I think that is absolutely key. So like the visual that I have in my head is like, he's not operating with a safety net anymore. It's like the circus, right? Like he doesn't get the safety net. And before, because it was a new position and he was coming over and there was a transition period, all of those different things. It was like, okay, well, if he gives us plays last year, it's almost like a bonus. It's like, hey, kind of ahead of schedule, making plays. This is great. Get him in the starting lineup the last quarter of the year, all of those different things. Anything that he did that was super positive to me felt like a bonus. It felt like a bonus. Now, I wanted to see him on the field more, and we talked about that, obviously. But in the grand scheme of things, it felt like a bonus. This year is a completely different mindset from the coaches and then from guys like us where it's not a bonus anymore. Like there are now expectations for Xavier Watts to be the leader on the back end. And one thing
from a production standpoint,
because I know he's a leader verbally. He always
and DJ's sort of the leader of the safety position, right? We're talking about on the field production, right?
Exactly.
Just to make sure people understand.
Absolutely, and it's twofold, right? His leadership and his maturation process is twofold. It's number one, he needs to take his game to another level, no doubt about it. You talked about that from a number standpoint, and then number two, he needs to bring some of these other guys along with him. He needs to be that leader on the field that is getting guys in place that are, he's not covering for them, but he's putting them in position to be successful. And he's doing it by what he does. They're watching him. They're learning. Whatever the case may be, he's bringing those guys along with him. So is that a lot of pressure on him? Yeah. But you know what? I don't think he would have it any other way.
No. Anyone that knows Xavier at all knows that he kind of wants that.
Exactly.
Which is because he's a real quiet kid. He's not like a real like flamboyant type of guy.
Sure.
He's that internally driven guy. Like he wants all that smoke. He wants you to doubt him. He wants the ball to come to you. He wants you to think that he's not good enough that I'm going to throw at that guy. He's like, bring it.
Right.
That's just the kind of mentality that he has. He's a guy that wants the opportunity. Xavier thinks he's really good. Like he's not a kid you got to convince, hey man, like I need more from you. You're a really good football player. He knows he's good. And that's part of the problem he's had. It's like, look, give me a shot. I'm out here making plays every day in practice. I'm making plays on the ball. I'm dominating the Notre Dame DBs in practice. I'm making plays and I'm dominating the first team defense and on scout team. And you're not giving me that. Give me that chance. I want to go play. I want to show you that I'm that dude. Right. And that's why he embraced defense so much, because as soon as they moved him over, Marcus Freeman was like, hey, we love you here. We want to keep you here. Like, you're our guy. We see a bright future for you. And that was the first time he'd really been embraced that way at Notre Dame, as like a guy that they showed belief in, because the guy that recruited him to Notre Dame, he never got to play for. That was Chip Long, is the guy that recruited Xavier Watts, not Del Alexander. That was a Chip recruitment, right? And so I don't know, like maybe the coaches at Notre Dame didn't think of Xavier what Chip did, or whatever the case may be, or that Marcus Freeman does. But once he made that defense and they bought into it, and then there was the cross training thing. What was that early last year, right?
It was when Avery went down. It was when Avery went down.
Yeah, and so like eventually they said, okay, you're going to be there. This is actually going to be the first season he's going to be a defensive back the entire year.
Right, exactly.
And that's also a reason why I think we're going to see a jump. But he wants that. He wants that challenge, and that's what I love about Xavier Watts. You need guys like that, right? Like that's how the great DBs are, right? They want to be that guy. They want to give that opportunity. You don't think Elohi Gilman was like, I dare you to throw the ball at me. Like, you know what I mean? Like, he wasn't getting offended when they wouldn't throw it at him. He wanted them to throw it at him. And it's funny, I was talking to somebody that close to Cam Hart when I was told that he was coming back before it was announced. And one of the reasons why was because of Benjamin Morrison's emergence. Cam felt they're going to throw at him more. Now, you're a cornerback. Like, normally corners like, don't throw at me. That's disrespectful. Cam's like, no, throw it at me, because he just has that different mentality, right? He wants you to throw at him. Why? Because that's my chance to go make a play.
Exactly.
It's my chance to go do something. And you want more guys like that. So if Xavier can continue his coverage potential and then enhance it now that he's full-time, and you're talking about a safety that's a sub 50% completion percentage guy allowed, then you have your other cornerback who's right at 50 in Cam Hart, and then your other corner, Benjamin Morrison, sub 50 as well. All of a sudden, Notre Dame becomes a really difficult thing to pass on. Right? Now it's like, okay, well, let's try to go at their linebackers. You know what I mean? And that's the impact that Xavier can have.
Sure.
And if I fully anticipate Xavier being that guy, like,
gosh,
we're going to have our most confident thing. This is one.
Yes.
Right?
We don't even have to do that segment, because this is what I'm most,
I'm most confident Xavier's going to be pretty good. Now, is he going to be All-American good? That's a different kind of leap.
Sure.
But he's going to be the Jalen Elliott, Elohi Gilman good this season. He's going to be that kind of player. Then what does he do beyond that? That's going to be a bit of a question. Then it becomes, Vince, back to where you started on this. Who's that next dude?
Right.
And that's where Ramon Henderson comes into play.
Absolutely. Because he was the one that was getting a good amount of playing time towards the end of the season as well. Made some plays here and there. I feel like with him, it is a light bulb moment for him. Is the light bulb going to go on for him? And if it does, he's got all the tools. Like, he has the tools to be a really good safety. But too many times in the past, it's been, well, you're out of position. Oh, you just made a great play in the end zone on a play. I just got done watching the Clemson game last night. Made a great play on the ball in the end zone. You know what exactly.
Is that the one they interviewed for targeting, but then said that they didn't target?
Okay. Yep, because it was perfect. He hit him in the chest. He hit him with his shoulder.
Yeah,
I mean, it was textbook on what they want safeties to do on balls that are in play.
The Virginia game was one of the best individual safety games Notre Dame's had in the last 5 years. His first game playing safety.
Yeah.
Right. You remember that he made that Kyle Hamilton type play, and then he had came off an edge pressure and blew a guy up. Yeah. Yeah.
So I mean, he's made these plays that we know that he can make. It's, can he be consistent with it? Is he going to be a rotation guy who just comes in and makes some plays here and there, or is he going to be a guy that they can trust to come in and start and make those plays all game long? I think that's the biggest question mark with Ramon going forward.
And for me, when I look at Ramon, it's just like he's the polar opposite complete opposite of Xavier Watts. He's the freaky athlete that's going to go to the combine and run a 4.4, jump high, broad jump is going to be great. But his film is like, that guy's just not a natural football player.
Right.
And there's too much. Now, there's been times when that's not the case. but his performance is so up and down. I mean, when you look at his production last year, Vince, I mean, there's things that you look at and you're like, man, that's pretty good. But he also misses a lot of tackles. Him and DJ Brown both. Second and third, our first and third on the defense last year, according to Pro Football Focus, and missed tackles. Between the two of them, they had 20. You cannot have safeties missing that many tackles. You can't. You know, you look at their missed tackle rate. You know, Ramon Henderson was led second on the defense. Jordan Patel had the most, but that's because he played fewer snaps. He had 3 missed tackles on a small number of plays, which I thought it's how their miss percentage is your number of missed tackles related to your number of total tackles. It's not miss per on the number of plays that you have. You know, but Ramon was 28.6, so for 28.6 relative to the number of tackles that he had. DJ Brown was 20.7. Those numbers just cannot be. And then you look at Xavier Watts, and he's 8.9. He only had 4 missed tackles all year.
Sure.
Right? Like, you need more of that. You need him. Right. You need Ramon to be that more consistent player. You know, when you look at Ramon and you look at the plays he's given up, he's 18 to 22. Opponents were 18 to 22 throwing the ball against him last year, but only gave up 10 yards per completion. That's, you know, because he was always like that second late. The ball would get thrown.
He'd make the play,
and he'd make the tackle.
Right. The tackle.
That's fine.
Not the play.
I mean, the longest reception he gave up all year was 26 yards, according to Pro. Again, these are Pro Football Focus numbers, and so you look at it and you're saying that was against South Carolina. You look at it and say, you know, man, like, dude, you've got a chance to be a really good player. It just you need to really want it, and that's kind of my big question. Ramon is, how bad does Ramon want to be a great player?
Mm-hmm.
Right? How bad does Ramon want to really be an impactful player? And does the light kind of go on from an instinctual standpoint? And then the other part of it is, I'm very curious to see how Al Golden's going to use Ramon this year, because I think he now has a better sense of what's Ramon good at. Here's the thing with Ramon. I don't want Ramon playing a lot of man coverage. Just not his thing. But, you know, jumping at crossers, jumping overs, playing center field, coming down in the alley to do certain things, he can do that stuff. And you know what Ramon's also really good at? He's your best blitzer from the second and third level, like as a safety. Like, he is a pretty good blitzer. So there's going to be aspects of it where you can do that. But here's the thing. This is where it ties all together. Xavier Watts has to be able to come down in the alley, play man coverage, and play center field if you're going to be triggering Ramon, unless you're just rotating Ramon and Xavier at that spot, which you don't want to do. You want to have them together. So that's another part of it, Vince, is something I want to see from Ramon is I want to see him being utilized more to attack downhill as a run defender, as a run stuffer. You know, he can be that, you know, that guy you're bringing on stunts. He can be a guy that you're triggering because he's long. He's 6'1.5". He's got really long arms. He's a pretty strong kid, you know, and so now how do you utilize him more effectively to his skill sets? Those are things that we're going to find out. But he's just a guy that has to be more consistent. He was probably the most inconsistent. Like, DJ Brown is who he is. You just say, hey, stop putting him in those situations. You know what I mean? But with Ramon, it's kind of like, it's harder to do that with him because some games you're like, dude, he was really good today. And other games you're like, was Ramon even out there? Remember there was that one game at home late in the year? You and I were looking at it like, I'm trying to remember. I think it was the UNLV game. And you and I looked at each other like, did Ramon play? Like that's a good thing for a corner.
Right.
But for a safety, that's not a good thing. Because safeties have so many more opportunities to come make plays in the run game and different things like that. I was like, did Ramon even play? I had to go back and watch the film to even see if he was even on the field. And he played like 30 snaps that game. And you're like, yeah, that's not good. So that's the big thing for Ramon is he has to be that guy that's more consistent because he's got the athletic tools, Vince. But the question we had about him when he came to Notre Dame was he was a great track guy. Like he was a sprinter. The question was, can Ramon be a football player? That was a bigger question. And we're going to have to find that out, right? I mean, this is a guy, Vince, just want to point this out. This is a kid that ran a 10.59 as a senior.
Wow.
Right?
That's some good straight ahead speed.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. That kid can move.
Sure.
but is he a football player?
Right.
If that light goes on, and here's the thing. If the light, we talked about Xavier needs to do what he needs to build on what he did last year.
Yes.
If for some reason, and this is probably the biggest if that I have on defense, maybe on the entire team, if the light goes on for Ramon, and I'm not betting on it, but if it does, this defense is going to be insanely good. Because now you're talking about a 6'1.5", long-armed, 200-pound kid that runs a 10.5, 900-meter dash that now has figured out how to play football on a consistent level. With next to Xavier Watts, with arguably one of the best not even arguably, one of the best corner tandems in college football. The arguable part is, are they the best? That's very debatable. They still have a lot to prove, but without there's no debate. They're in everybody thinks they're in the conversation to be as a top 5 corner tandem. If all of a sudden Ramon and Xavier step up, that is to me the ultimate key to this team. And that's where this safety position is such a unique topic, because that is a true statement. But the ground they have to go from where they were to finish the season to that is enormous.
Yeah.
It's enormous. My hope, my optimism comes from, if you want to know why deep down I have this little strange thing of, I'm actually kind of somewhat excited to see the safeties play, is because go watch the second half of the South Carolina game and watch Ramon and Xavier and DJ playing in that game. And because remember, Vince, second half of that game, they completely dominated South Carolina.
Yes, they did.
Dominated South Carolina.
Yeah.
The only touchdown South Carolina had that game, he had a mistake by a corner, was that crazy pass to Jordan Birch I believe on a short field after, but even when the offense was giving up pick sixes and giving them short fields with interceptions, the defense would step up and make stops. And the safeties were a big part of that. And, Ramon, I talked about how Xavier led the defense in stops last year with 13. Ramon only had 5. 2 of them were in the South Carolina game. So it's like he had 6 tackles in that game. Mm-hmm. He was disrupted. He had the fumble recovery. Remember where early where Tariq Bracy stripped the ball and Ramon was right where he needed to be, coming on a nice inside-out angle. Tariq had to Tariq did a great job of going outside to force the guy back inside, and then Ramon would have been there to clean it up. So even if the guy doesn't fumble, Ramon's there to make the tackle for a short gain.
Sure.
But because the guy dropped the ball, Ramon was where he needed to be. Boom, right there following. You say, well, Ramon didn't make a play. He did make a play, because if he's late getting there or not sure, he doesn't see that ball.
Right.
And then maybe somebody beats him to the ball. You got to be where you're supposed to be. And so when you look at stuff like that, you're like, man, if he can give me, but then a couple missed tackles, you're like, oh, dude, take a better angle to the football. So,
sure.
But he showed me some potential in that game where it's like, dude, if he could do that on a more consistent basis, if he could be that guy that was against Virginia. Because we talked about this, Vince. Remember the play Kyle Hamilton made against Florida State in 2021 that everybody loves? Ramon made almost that exact same play against Virginia. Almost exact same play. It was the first game he'd ever played safety. And you're like, man, I wish that guy could be there more, could do that more consistently. Because if those two players, if Ramon and Xavier play to their potential this season, then all of a sudden safety doesn't just become a weakness. It becomes a strength.
Yeah.
It becomes an impact strength. And it could maybe somewhat salvage the 2020 class outside of Michael Mayer, because it's been a pretty disappointing class up to this point when you think about it. Your entire you want to hear something crazy? Every receiver that Notre Dame signed from 19 and 20 classes is no longer a receiver. 2 of them are now playing DBs. The others are all off the roster.
Wow.
Yeah, and it's a little nuts. And that 2020 class, it was only 17 kids. 5 of them have transferred. It was actually 18 kids. 1 of them got arrested and kicked off, released from his NLI. I remember Landon Bartleson. And then 5 of them have transferred. 1 guy retired to become a medical doctor, which I have no problem with, Alexander Ahrensberger. And then, of course, Michael Mayer went on. But this is redemption year potentially for that 2020 class with Chris Tyree, with Xavier Watts, with Ramon Henderson.
Both of those guys are X factors.
Right. Jordan Patel-Ho, Riley Mills. That group has been a little disappointing so far. Now it's a chance for that group to kind of step up and say, hey, we're going to make our presence felt now. And it's going to come down to, these 2 are the key to that, Vince.
Right.
Ramon and Xavier are the key to that.
Well, and that's, of all the guys that we're going to talk about right now, for the 23 season, in my opinion, that's the highest ceiling tandem for at safety in the 23 season. Would you agree with that?
Say that again.
That the combination of Xavier Watts and Ramon Henderson, if they both play to their potential, is the highest ceiling duo for the 23 season.
Yes, for Notre Dame. Yes.
That's what I was referring to. Right.
Yes.
Now there may be some guys coming up the pipe that could eventually have a higher ceiling.
No, I don't even think that.
Okay. Well, there you go.
On the roster, I mean, look, Xavier and Ramon are the two most high ceiling guys they have on the roster.
Okay.
Including the freshman class.
Okay.
Now, maybe Bronte Johnson, but Bronte's not he hasn't signed yet.
Right.
Davis Andrews is a kid that I love. If they're able to get him, but he's, if Notre Dame gets him, he's still going to go on a Mormon mission. That's way down the road. Right. Of the guys on the roster now, to me, those are the two high ceilings that you have.
Perfect.
So to your point, Vince, it's not even just, it's flat out. You're 100% correct. And then that ties into the third safety, returning safety. If those two break out, now you can utilize DJ Brown as a true rotation guy, meaning DJ can be that guy that you plug and play at both safety spots.
Sure.
And now all of a sudden you can protect DJ a little bit more in certain ways and use DJ in the areas where he's a good player, but then limit, because where do you not want DJ Brown? In space.
Correct.
Well, it's kind of hard to protect the guy playing 40 snaps a game in the secondary from being in space. Right. Well, now if you have that second big time player, now maybe DJ is getting 20, 25 snaps. You can put him in the favorable matchups because DJ can play both safety spots better than, DJ can play both safety spots better than anybody. He's a really smart kid. He's a great leader, hard worker. Coaches absolutely love him. Players love him. Like, that's the kind of kid you want. He just has limitations in space. He's just not a great space guy. Right. Well, if you can protect DJ a little bit because your other two safeties can do so much, you can now each week say, okay, here's where we can use DJ where he can really be effective, and we can kind of limit putting him in those positions where he's not as good. Because when DJ Brown gets put in those situations and he gets beat, I don't even blame DJ Brown for that. He's giving you everything he's got. Like, I've never once looked at DJ Brown and said, man, that guy's not playing hard. That guy's not bringing it today. It's, why are you putting him in space like that? Now, sometimes he's got to make a mistake, right? Dude, take a better angle, make that play. All guys make those mistakes. But it's like, why are you putting him in the alley like that and asking him to play in space? That's not who he is.
Right. But that's another example of where the coaches need to know their players, right? And this is I'm not saying it's a problem, but I'm saying in the second year of a defense, all of these different things, right? You have an opportunity. Okay, you've had over a year with these guys now. You know their strengths and weaknesses. If those two guys ball out like we hope they are, now, like you said, now you can put this guy in a position to where we know his strength. Let's put him in a position of strength so that he can help this defense. And you're not hamstrung by having him have to do everything, right? The best thing that could happen to DJ Brown is that Ramon Henderson steps up. Yeah. And
I agree.
In a dark, quiet room, I bet you DJ would probably agree with that. You know what I mean? He wants to be the starter. I get that.
I hope not. I hope not.
Okay, fair enough. I see what you're saying.
But I think I say in a dark, quiet room, would the Notre Dame coaches feel that way? Okay, I can go with you on that. Okay. But I hope DJ's doesn't feel that way. It's kind of like Joe Schmidt. Like, did you want Joe Schmidt to go to the coaches and say, Coach, look, man, I'm not getting it done. You need to put something. No, he's not going to say that because he wants to go out there and prove himself. And when he has a bad game, he wants to go out there the next week and play better and not have a bad game, right? Sure. You hope that he has that mentality. But the coaches need to kind of have that way, have that kind of look at it. So, but again, that's that building block that we talked about at the very beginning, Vince, and I think you hit on it pretty well is, Batman has to be Batman first. But if he is, then, and Robin steps up, then all of a sudden, you're good there. Now it impacts the entire depth chart, right? And you start getting a little fired up about what they potentially could be. And those are the only three knowns that we have, right? Everybody else at the safety position is a new guy. Yeah, exactly. Which says a lot about, and here's part of the reason why I'm actually somewhat confident that we're going to get that. Maybe they don't all reach their full potential, but we're at least going to get better plays. I actually do think Chris O'Leary is a good position coach. I do too. You don't see the safeties out of position a whole lot. You don't see them with just really bad technical mistakes, right? Sometimes they'll take bad angles with the football. That's something that's got to be improved. But the fact that they weren't a super talented group last year, but they did their job, that's a sign of good coaching.
Mhm.
Now it's about figuring out a way to take that next level. Okay, yes, you've done a good job teaching them the fundamentals. Now can you teach the next level where maybe you're helping them know the offense even better? And I mean offense, where you're doing more to challenge them in the film room, so they see those little tells. Ooh, when this guy lines up like this, 7 out of 10 times he's running an over route. And so I'm going to position myself to jump that sucker, right? That mental part of the game, that's that next level thing that you want to see from your position coach, right?
Yeah.
And that's where I want to see from Chris O'Leary this season. But he's done a good job teaching the basics and the fundamentals and stuff like that, and getting good, solid play from a group that didn't necessarily always have the most talent or the best attitudes. And now you've got, at least 2 of your 3 veterans are guys that I know their attitude is the right way. With Ramon, I just don't know. He's just such a unique kid. I'm not saying he has a bad attitude. It's just harder to read him.
Right.
Sure. But man, when he's on though, bro, he can do some things. And so I'm confident they're going to at least play better, but the floor is kind of low from a production standpoint to play better.
That's true.
And so how much better is the question,
right,
that we're going to have.
And that's the hardest part for me, like, bold predictions and all of those different things. And I generally, when I do a bold prediction, I go with a stat, and we're not getting there yet, but like, that's been the hardest part, is like coming up with a stat that is a bold prediction, because what they've done in the past with this particular group is so low. And, so it's difficult. There's no doubt about it. I've had to kind of revamp my thought process on what a bold prediction is for this group.
Yeah, it's a tough group to read,
right,
man. It really is a tough group to read.
Let's talk about these newcomers for a second, and we'll talk about the transfer first, right? We'll talk about Antonio Carter. What is his transition like? Because didn't he play mostly corner?
Corner. Yep.
Yeah, he played mostly corner at his last stop, Rhode Island, I believe. And, now they're asking him to play safety. And I know, I've heard Ryan talk about the fact that he has spoken to Antonio's coach, and how they could basically put him anywhere, and he was successful, and he learned the position very quickly. Yeah. Yep, he's fundamentally sound, all of those different things. And that's awesome. And that's what you want to hear. There's no doubt about it. But the biggest question mark for us going into his first season in a Notre Dame uniform is, how does that translate to the Notre Dame defense at safety? So new position, new team, new coach, all of those things, right? What does that look like? Because we also haven't seen him yet.
Right.
And so this is all going to be brand new.
I think with Antonio, he's going to have a little bit more of a transition year than the other transfers, because when you look at like Javonte Jean-Baptiste, he's going from one Power 5 school that was a playoff team to another Power 5 school that wants to be a playoff team. Thomas Harper is a guy that played in a complex defense under Jim Knowles, right? So picking up Al Golden's complex system is not going to be as hard as it would for a guy that came from a real basic, just line up and be fast type of defense, right? So you expect the transition there. Sam Hartman's played a ton of football. Antonio Carter's played a lot, but he played at the FCS level. Now, he played the FCS level that he played in. That league produces a lot of transfers that go on to be really good Division I players. Jared Verse, the defensive end from Florida State, is that guy. So, I just got the text from you. Why did you send me that while I was in the middle talking?
I did that on purpose, I think.
Okay.
Sorry.
Vince is killing me today. But when you the transition he's going to make is a little tougher, because he's not only moving from the FCS level to Power 5.
Right.
He's doing that. Like when Jared Verse made that transition, first of all, he's a more talented player, but there's been other guys, right? So like the receiver from South Carolina last year, Antoine Wells, he came from this league. So this kid's matched up against him. But the difference, Antoine Wells went from being a receiver at James Madison to a receiver at South Carolina.
Same position. Right.
Right. This kid's not only making the transition from FCS to Division I, in one of the best FCS divisions, but he's now having to switch positions
Right.
and playing in a complex defense.
Sure.
So I don't have super high expectations for him for this year. I think what I expect is hopefully he can be that number 4 safety, be a starter on all the special teams, get some reps at safety early, maybe as that number 4 guy.
Okay.
Maybe not play a ton, but then as the year goes on, maybe plays a little bit more. And then if they lose a couple of these guys, because DJ's definitely gone, if Xavier has the kind of breakout we think he can have, it's going to be hard for him to decide to come back. He may be ready to go. Who knows? Ramon's a 5th-year guy, correct? So Ramon's was in the 19 class, not the 20 class.
Ramon is
19, 20, 21,
senior. It says on the roster.
Okay, so then he was a 20 guy. So he was in the. Let me just look that up because that's gonna bother me. Because I thought he was 2020 class. Yeah, he's 2020. So I was right.
So he's got one more year.
He's got one more year left.
Yeah.
Because now the 2020 class is the one class that the COVID year doesn't give them an extra year.
Okay, so it's 20
it
and
only
beyond.
gives them an extra year if they played that year. Right? So if you were in the 19 class and you redshirted in 19 and then played in 20, you technically have 2 red shirts because 20 doesn't count.
Gotcha.
You can't double up one season. So the guys that redshirted in 2020 don't also get another COVID year.
Gotcha.
So he's a traditional 5th-year guy next year.
That's why why it's senior, so he could.
Correct.
Yeah.
So, hopefully he comes back, if he does well. But that's where you're kind of hoping. That's partly, and this is what Coach Freeman explained when he talked about Antonio Carter, was this is a guy that part of the reason we liked him was that he did have that second year. And that he did have, hey, come here, transition, learn, be special teams. If you work around the rotation, great. If not, next year you're coming out and you're gonna be a guy
as a potential
to be a guy.
Starter. Yeah, right.
Because we may lose all 3 of our veterans from next year. So that's my expectation. I really think his biggest impact in year 1 is going to be in coverage on special teams. That's where I think his biggest impact is going to be. Because also, if what we talked about earlier, if Ramon and Xavier step up, then it's going to be harder to justify getting Antonio 30 snaps a game. But they like to use 4 safeties, and I could see him being one of those guys that is part of that 4-man safety rotation. But I could also see one of the freshmen being that guy as well, to be honest with you. And I also think what we'll see even more of this year is if Ramon and Xavier are that guy, seeing more of what we saw in the bowl game, which is more of they played 4 safeties in the bowl game, but it was like 3 played more, and that's kind of what I think we could see in the bowl game is a little bit more of that is more of a 3-man rotation where Xavier is, or where DJ is sort of that third guy or Ramon is that third guy. One of those 2 guys is kind of that third guy is kind of how I see that maybe shaping out a little bit more if one of those younger guys isn't ready to play. But I think ideally they'd like, because remember, they had Houston Griffith in that game, but I think he only played a few snaps. He didn't play a ton in that game. He was mostly playing on special teams. So it was more of a true 3-man rotation. They'll have no problem doing that, but I think they'd like to have 4, especially in some of the games, Tennessee State, Central Michigan,
of course,
Duke, Louisville, games like that. 2
fresh guys can come in. Not fresh, but you know what I mean. Guys that may rotate in, but they're going to get, you'll have 2 separate guys from the starters. They're going to get a bunch of snaps potentially.
Right. Yeah. So we'll see. Those guys are going to have to force their way onto the field is the point. They're not just going to be in there because they're number 4.
Right.
The number 4 guy is going to have to – the number 3 guy is going to play, right? No doubt. The number 4 guy has to show that he's ready to play. He's not going to play just because he's the 4. Because and that's partly of there is some interchangeableness to how they use the safeties. Right. Ramon can play either spot, but he's probably better in the boundary. Xavier can play their spot, and DJ can play their spot. Although I would also argue that DJ is also better in the boundary. So, between the 3 of them, you can get all the snaps that you need.
Sure.
If it depends on how you're going, and the fact that one guy that we need to talk about that actually was not in our overview, Vince, that we need to talk about is Thomas Harper.
Sure,
because we didn't talk about the corner spot either.
That's a good point.
Technically, he's a safety.
Yeah,
and we could see him playing safety too. Because that's the other thing is that's where we might see that 4th safety is in base. If they're playing a game like against Navy where they're not playing a lot of nickel, then Thomas Harper might be your rotation safety in that game. He might be your number 4.
The Navy
when you're
game
playing
is so
some
weird.
of those more. Yeah.
With how they put defense on the field and who's playing and what the rotation looks like. And
Right.
like, I can't wait for people to overreact at the defensive rotation against Navy. Like, that's what I'm totally anticipating. But like, prime example is they might be using Thomas Harper in a different way. Maybe he's playing the lone safety in the back because they want him shooting the gaps. I mean, who knows how they're going to play play defense on them.
Right. So, I mean, I fully anticipate Thomas Harper being the nickel this year.
Right.
But there's going to be games where you're not using your nickel as much.
Sure.
How are you going to utilize him in those games? He'll be part of the safety rotation because part of how Oklahoma State used him, he was a nickel, but he would then rotate as part of the nickel. They would roll a guy down. He would play off the ball. He'd do some different things, and so if they take away the nickel, he's playing safety. And we don't talk a lot about him as a safety, and I hope that we don't have to talk about him a lot as a safety, because if we're talking about him being a regular at safety, that means something bad happened at safety, and they had to move him there, which then hurts you at nickel.
Right.
Because this kid is an excellent nickel, in my opinion. Like, you go pop in the Oklahoma State film. Because it was one of those ones, like, I didn't know who he was. I mean, I knew the name because I'd studied Oklahoma State's stats and stuff, but like, you're like, okay, well, let's go watch the film. Like, numbers are pretty good. PFF numbers are pretty good. Actually had numbers better than Tariq Bracy in some areas. Let's pop in the film. And then you pop in the film, you're like, wow, this guy's really good. And then you see what happened in the TCU game where they were shutting TCU down. He was playing great football. He gets hurt. And like the series after he gets hurt, TCU goes down and scores. And that's when TCU made that big comeback against Oklahoma State because he was out the rest of the game.
Yeah.
I don't think it's the only reason, but it was definitely a factor. And then the Oklahoma's defense falls apart second half of the year and only played one game during that stretch. And he was very good. He was every bit as important to their defense as Tariq Bracy was to Notre Dame. Imagine if Tariq Bracy would have got hurt in the middle of the season and they didn't have him the rest of the year, right? Like, it was a similar impact. And I would even argue more so because they didn't have Benjamin Morrison and Cam Hart and Xavier Watts and other players like that down the stretch. So Thomas Harper is another guy that I could see being part of this rotation, but two things hopefully happen. Number one is you hope that they use him more at nickel. And number two, you hope that other guys, Antonio Carter, and we'll talk about Ben Minnick and Nadon Schuler, you hope that they step up as well to where you don't need to cross-train Thomas Harper as much once you get into the season because, like, hey, we're good here. Go be the very best nickel that you can be. And then within that nickel role, you can here's the thing is if having a guy like Thomas Harper compared to Tariq Bracy, and this is how Oklahoma State used him. And I hope that Al Golden and Chris O'Leary and the defensive staff, Mike Mickens, and the linebackers coach, Max Bulla, I hope they study Oklahoma State's film as far as how Harper played. Not study it for schematic stuff, but what they did is there were times they would actually roll their safeties. So like they would actually have Thomas Harper go back and bring that other safety down, and then Thomas Harper would almost play as a hash safety, right? Or he would kind of be in the middle of the field, and then the other safeties would be here, and they'd kind of like run fit the safeties, and the linebackers would play out. That's a little bit exotic, but the point is, Tariq Bracy was a corner. You were not going to be putting him on deep half or playing quarters off the ball. Thomas Harper can do that. He can play over the top off the hash.
You can be more multiple when quarters. The nickel is in there. Yeah.
Yeah. You can do some different stuff with him. And I hope that they get some of those things. That's where you hope the safety impact and the safety play can be there as part of, because then you're basically now in a 3 safety rotation as opposed to, a 3 corner alignment like they were last year.
Right.
And I think that's an area that Thomas Harper could help this football team a little bit. But I just don't think he is a full-time safety.
Right.
That's my thing. I don't he was definitely a better player on level 2 than he was on level 3, but he could do the job on level 3 in that way that the Oklahoma State used him. And we'll see how Notre Dame uses him this year. I don't know the answer to that, to be honest with you, but it's going to be interesting. But yeah, I mean, we don't have a nickel breakdown, right? We're not having a nickel show breakdown.
Well, it'd be very short.
Right.
I mean,
we talk about Thomas Harper and Clarence Lewis and Ryan Barnes, basically. But like we already talked about Lewis and Barnes and the corner road.
Right. Exactly.
So I keep forgetting about Thomas Harper as being a safety.
Yeah.
But he's another guy that could factor in if there is more of a need at safety this season. But I really like that kid's nickel film, Vince. Like, really like his nickel film. It's impressive. It really is impressive. You know who else has been impressive? For those who read the intel piece,
Ben Minnick. Yeah,
and I finally was told the correct way to pronounce his last name.
I was going to ask you that because I heard you say it, so I'm mimicking you.
Yeah, because I've been saying Minich,
right?
Because it's ICH, and
correct.
That's the sound. I mean, sandwich, ICA. I mean,
but
yeah, ick is ICK, but it is what it is. It's Minnick.
Okay,
so Ben Minnick.
So now we know, which is
now
good.
We know, and I do value getting it right. So that's why I was finally able to get someone to tell me the other day what that was. So yes, Ben Minnick has been a guy that has been impressive. He was impressive up until the thumb injury in the spring, and he's been impressive in the summer. And when people tell me impressive, it's not just so much that he runs around and he's but he actually makes a lot of plays on the ball, and that's something that this secondary needs. And I think that's going to be something that's going to give him a chance to play this year. Is hey, he may not always be in the right spot, but this guy makes plays, and they need more safeties that can make plays, in my opinion. And hopefully Ben can be that guy.
Yeah, I mean that was very when I was reading through your intel. And it was, which is great because I love finding out the intel just like everybody else, by the way. I love reading Brian's intel. And it's funny because he texted me this morning. He's like, hey, did you read my intel? I was like, yeah, man, it looked good. And because, I don't like to be bothering him. Well, hey, what have you heard about so-and-so? What have you heard about so-and-so? So I get it when you guys
I tell you, like I've never.
Of course. No, of course. But like, I don't want to bother you with that. You're working. Like, I get it. So I love reading the intel. And when I was reading Minnick's intel, I was like, okay, like, because he flashed in the spring at some of the practices that we were at, like he was flashing. There's no doubt about it. And it was like, okay, this is an early enrollee who is flashing at safety in a place where we didn't see a lot of flash, going back to what we were talking about in the intro. And so I was very excited to see that he has continued that, because I was worried with his injury that he had, that he might, his growth might be stunted a little bit, you know what I mean? Or his maturation process at the position might be stunted a little bit, but it doesn't sound like that's the case.
Well, and it was a thumb, so he could still move around and
absolutely. So I was excited to read that. I think playmaking is a premium at the safety position. And I think if you can make plays, and I know that Ben Minnick can make plays, that's going to allow him to be in the mix. Right. And I think that's cool. Like I'm excited to see what 22 is doing and where they've got him at the beginning of the fall to, well, not the end of fall, because we're not going to be there, but like to the middle, to the, 3/4 of the way through the fall, when we're still being able to see some camp and things like that. So it's exciting to see what Ben Minnick brings to the table, because like you said, they could lose the 3 veterans next year.
Yeah.
And then it's like, okay, this is what's next.
Yeah.
So
and he's an interesting one, because I remember when Notre Dame got him, we had 2 thoughts on it. Like, junior film, that's an Indiana Purdue guy, right? But we said, but I'm gonna let's see how the senior year plays out, because people that I know and trust around the program said this kid looked phenomenal at the summer camp. He's made a big jump, right? Okay, cool. Here's where I have him now. Let's see what he does. And then he goes out to his senior year and he plays great. I had a friend of mine, a guy I used to know, don't really talk to him all that much anymore, but he's an Ohio State guy.
Okay.
And he does like high school football games. Like he does play-by-play.
Yeah.
And he calls me. He did a playoff game with Lakota West. And he says, hey, look, I love Malik Harper. He goes, but the best player in the field today in this game was Ben Minnick. Like, he was phenomenal. He was their best player for like Lakota West. Well, I had Malik Harper as a top 100 player. And then you just watch Ben as a senior and like, okay, he ended up with a 4-star grade. He's a big reason why the entire defensive class last year, which is really nuts, the entire defensive class last year earned a 4-star grade on the IB board. Like, it was to the point where I was like, dude, I got to reevaluate all these guys, because there's no way that, and then I re-graded them all and I'm like, yep, they're all 4-star guys, and Ben's a guy that just made that jump. And the reason he made the jump is because he had a jump in athleticism, even a bigger jump in athleticism, because he was always really smart and heady. And, when guys look like him, they get that, he's really smart, and
right.
Other guys get that, well, he's just really athletic. It's like, okay, well, that guy's pretty smart too. And this guy's pretty athletic too. And that's one thing I do like about the freshman class, though, is Ben is really smart, and Adon Schuler is really smart. And that's why the thing I liked about their film is they both make a lot of plays in different ways. They complement each other really nicely. Adon is more of a get downhill alley guy, make plays against the run, jump the tight end routes. Ben can play, showed as a senior, can play center field a little bit more. He can be a cover guy. He's a really good trigger guy, guy that you're bringing on pressures and stuff like that. I promise you that Ben Minnick is going to block at least 1 or 2 kicks in his career. I bank on it. I'm just telling you right now, like he's going to be that guy. But man, I got to tell you, like hearing that he's broken out, and we got to see what Adon Schuler can do. Unfortunately, he missed the whole spring with a shoulder injury. So, but he's probably going to be a year away. But you're going to need him to grow up fast in a hurry too, because even if he doesn't play a lot this year, you're definitely going to need him to play next year. There's no doubt about it.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
So we'll see how the group develops. But Ben breaking out was huge for Notre Dame.
Yep.
Because now you have a little bit more insurance at safety, where if he doesn't play, it's because and he's healthy, it's because other guys are playing well.
Sure.
If they're not playing well, you have a kid that you can put in there, and he's going to have a chance to be a good football player. And they needed that, because if Ben was what we thought he was as a junior, then they're in trouble if one of the veterans goes down.
Sure.
But
yeah, he's exciting. And then, he's got a classmate that is equally exciting, at least coming in as a recruit, and that's Adon Schuler at safety. But he was battling an injury, I believe, in the spring. And so we never actually had a chance to see him, did we, in the spring? He was out. He was out. That's what I thought. So, so he was out, but he's back. And that was obviously also in the intel piece, and looking pretty good. Now he's behind because he was out in the spring. And so what does that look like moving into fall camp and things like that, and his ability to, potentially get on the field, et cetera? Where do you think he kind of falls with all that? Because I think his future at Notre Dame is very, very bright, but this is a positional breakdown for 23, not a recruiting breakdown. So, how do you see him contributing in 23?
If he does, it'll probably be on special tems.
Okay, that's what I figured.
And the other thing too is with Adon, I'm going to be careful with Adon if I'm Notre Dame, because the last thing that you want is for a safety to develop a habitual shoulder problem. That's a great way to have a kid's career get tanked.
Yeah, just snuffed
out.
And
Adon can be a 5-year guy, I think. A lot of skill players I don't view as 5-year guys, but Adon can be a 5-year guy. Let him maybe play 4 games this year, late game stuff, and then redshirt him, and then let him have that 4 years afterwards. I don't always feel that way, but I feel like he's a guy that I would do that with because of the injury.
Okay.
So hopefully, now I also am a believer that if he is that good on special teams, where you're like, this dude is a starter for us if we didn't choose, then you play him. Right? Because I do believe in special teams and those type of things. So I really want to see him. I would love to see him take a year and get that shoulder right.
Sure.
So that way this doesn't become a habitual problem.
Let me ask you this, Brian. Does your decision to redshirt him, if you're the coach, I'm going to put you in the coach's room, right? If you're a coach and, he's not quite ready for fall camp, does your decision to redshirt him depend on how much fall camp he's able to get in?
No.
Okay.
It would be determined by the rest of the depth chart.
Okay.
If I felt good about where I am with at least 4 to 5 of my other guys,
okay,
then I'd say we can take our time with Adon.
Okay.
Right? Like, and I'd sit down and have that conversation with them and say, hey, look, here's where we're going to be. Here's what we need to do. Here's how we're going to get to this. And then I need you to be ready mentally, because if something happens, but here's why we're doing it. Right? So now here's the other part of it, Vince. If he just flat beats people out in fall camp, then he's going to play. I mean, that's the other part of this is like if Adon goes out there in the spring or in the fall camp and he's just one of your 4 best safeties, you got to play him. I mean, that's the reality of it.
Sure.
You don't ever redshirt a kid who's one of your better players just for whatever reason, as long as he's healthy. For me, I would just simply say, if he's not one of those 4, that's the post-fall camp conversation I would have.
Right.
Is we want to take it slow with you because of the shoulder. We want to get you healthy. And hey, look, man, we might lose up to 3 of our safeties this offseason. right? We can't go into next year with you being questionable because there's another setback because of your shoulder, whatever the case may be.
Right.
That's the way that I would look at it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I like it.
That's how I treat him.
So we kind of talked about what we're most confident in. I mean, there's not a whole lot of reason to belabor this point because we're both confident in Xavier Watts and kind of what he brings to the table and that he's going to take that next step and, not predicting All-American, but at the same time predicting that he's going to be a dude at safety for Notre Dame. That's what I'm most confident about as well. No doubt about it. So we get to the fun part of our little breakdown here. And I mentioned before, and I'm talking about, or I take it back, our biggest questions. We kind of talked about those as well already. Pretty much anybody not named Xavier Watts is a question as far
even
as
the question marks are just
Sure.
to sum it up, Vince, is will these guys play to their potential?
Right.
That's what it comes down to.
Absolutely. Yep. I agree.
It really comes down to that. It's yes, the talent is there, but
right.
Will they do it? Will Xavier Watts be able to be consistent? Right. We know he can make plays, but is there another level for him to get to? We're going to find out.
Yep.
Is Ramon Henderson even capable of being a consistent guy? I don't know that he is. I mean, so those are all parts of it. Will the new guys be able to help out and make an impact? We don't know the answers to those things.
Sure.
And we're going to find that out. That's the thing. We're going to find that out. And, I don't know what that is going to be, but that's the biggest question. Or are they just going to be what because there's a chance, Vince, even with Xavier Watts, that they're just what they were last year.
Right.
So let's say Xavier has a couple big games. Well, okay, then he's Brandon Joseph. That's what Brandon gave you. He great against Syracuse and great against Ohio State and just kind of blah the other games. You know what I mean? Well, okay, you're right back to where you were last year.
Sure.
And that's the biggest question is there another level for these guys? I mean, that's a fair question. We think there is. But even if Xavier jumps up, that's just one guy out of 3 to 4 that are going to play.
Right.
They need the whole unit to get better. Because if it's just Xavier and teams say, okay, we won't throw at that guy anymore, but you're still a problem at your other safety position, then and your linebackers aren't covering better, then you're still exactly where you were last year, basically. That's the concern for me. And then the other concern is obviously will the newcomers be able to make an impact? Because we hear things about them,
right?
But it's one thing to hear something; it's nothing for them to go and actually do it.
Absolutely.
And that to me remains a question mark at this group. And of course, big picture question mark is will this group produce a lot more? I mean, I don't think they can do worse production wise. I don't see how it can get worse than it was last year.
Agreed.
But how much improvement is okay? They had 7 passes defense last year. So was it 9 this year? That's not much of an improvement, right?
Sure.
They have to at least double
everything.
The total number of passes defense. That's breakups and interceptions come out. At least double. And I would argue they need to come close to tripling it if we're going to be honest about it. And no, I don't count the nickel as part of that. I count the nickel as part of the corner production. But if they use Thomas Harper in a different way than they use Tariq Bracy, then we can maybe have that conversation. But you need at least 2.5 times the production. So if you had 7 this year, you need at least 17 is where I'm going to look at it. You have to get there. You have to have that kind of disruption. If they don't, they're gonna have some problems. As far as when it comes to you're not beating Ohio State if your safeties are having no impact in the game.
Right.
Absolutely. Well, part of the reason that you were able to play with them last year is because your safeties did make plays in that game. Well, then they didn't make any, against Stanford. They didn't make any against Marshall. They didn't make enough against USC. Those are the different aspects of it, Vince, that you say how much more production will they get from the safeties this year? On ball production.
Right.
And that's something I'm with. Tackles for loss, pass breakups, interceptions. How much more on ball production will they have this year? Because they need a big jump. And that's asking a lot. That's from guys that played a bunch. All 3 of the guys that we're talking about that need to produce better, they all played at least 300 snaps last year, Vince. These aren't guys that like DJ Brown played over 500 snaps. Wow. Ramon Henderson played 316 and 319, and Xavier Watts played 366, according to Pro Football Focus. So these aren't guys that played 100 snaps, and you're hoping that now that they're full time they can. No, these were guys that were rotation players from Notre Dame last year.
Right.
You got to need more production. Have to.
Agreed. So speaking of more production, let's talk about our bold predictions.
Yeah.
And I mentioned earlier in the show that this one was harder for me because I like to do bold predictions based on numbers and things like that. And so I've got one that involves numbers, and then I've got one that involves a player and where I think he'll be. So how do you want to do this? You want to give yours? You want to give one of yours first?
Well, you do yours first.
Okay. All right. So my first one, and we talked about the numbers, and I'll just remind everybody: 5.5 tackles for loss, 7 passes defensed, 6 pass breakups, 1 interception. Like those are the numbers for the safeties last year. So my bold prediction is that Xavier Watts will do that by himself
Okay.
this year. By himself. And
So
I
you're taking
actually,
the tackles for loss number.
5.5, 7 passes defensed, 1 interception. And I think the interceptions actually might be higher than that.
6 breakups, 1 interception.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I wanted to, since those were just kind of nice clean numbers as far like they're there. So I just wanted to say like he will have the same production as the group did last year, if not more. So that would be the basement for me for Xavier Watts. So that's my first one. My second one is that Ben Minnick will be the 4th safety by the end of the year.
Okay.
And
I think that could happen much sooner than later.
Well, I guess I'm hedging my bet by saying by the end of the year.
Yeah.
But I think not only will he be the 4th safety, but he'll be playing as the 4th safety. Because you had mentioned earlier about, they could just stick with 3, and that kind of be the rotation, that kind of a thing. I'm saying he'll be 4, but he'll be part of a rotation. Like he'll be in the game making plays, that kind of a thing. So I guess I don't know if that's bold or not, but taking a true freshman and saying he'll be part of it over some of the guys that could be in that 4 hole. That's my bold.
I mean, it's really just one guy to be Antonio Carter, really.
True.
So you went a little soft on that last bowl.
All right, fair enough.
I'm going to add a little bit of salt to the wound here, Vince.
Okay.
I just looked this up too. They only had 1 forced fumble from the safeties.
Man,
that's it.
It's so bad.
That is a crazy lack of on-ball production.
But the thing is, like, these stats are terrible. I mean, let's call it what it is. These stats are terrible. Yeah. But the safeties weren't terrible. You know what I mean? They weren't great, obviously. I mean, the stats don't lie. But they weren't terrible. So it's like I almost feel like they should have lucked into some better stats than this just based on the way that they played. But they just didn't make plays last year. They were just kind of there.
Right. Yeah, they've got. I mean, it's got to be. My bold prediction is and it's going to be very bold. They're going to triple their on ball production in the past. Their pass game on ball production.
Okay.
So breakups and interceptions. I'm not going to go tackles for loss. It's possible,
sure,
but that's not what I care as much about. They don't need 15 tackles for loss. I don't need that. Right. Like if they go from 5 to 8 or 9, that's a really good jump. Just the way that they're used, they don't need 15. But the on-ball production, the pass game, breakups, passes, defense, that to me needs to get a lot better. And my bold prediction is they're going to triple that.
Okay,
that. I'll be honest with you, that bold prediction is the most wishing upon a star, hoping that it happens bold prediction than the others. Like the others are like, hey, I think that's possible.
Sure.
This one's more of like, man, I hope that comes true. It's more wishful thinking than it is a bold prediction. I'm just going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
Because they need it. They need it. I don't really have another bold prediction for this unit. I'm going to be honest with you, Vince, because it's just one of those things where it's like, and this is where I'm sympathetic. I'm busting your chops. I'm sympathetic to your second bold prediction because you're like, what else?
I was having trouble coming up with
They were so just last year that it's like, okay, I just want them to be good. I don't even care about them being phenomenal. I just want them to be good. And part of me wanted to be like, if Xavier Watts has the kind of breakout season that we think he has, he could be an All-American, kind of like I do with J.D. Bertrand.
Sure.
But I don't think he's going to have enough recognition from the ways that you need recognition to be an All-American. Because let's be honest about this, folks. Being an All-American is not always about being one of the best at your position.
Right. It's name rec.
Bingo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Exactly.
Absolutely. It's funny.
Unless he'd have to do it in like, okay, he has a pick 6 against. Like if Benjamin Morrison doesn't return that interception against Clemson for a touchdown, does he really get the recognition that he should have?
Sure.
Probably
exactly.
Not.
Because that was the big time moment.
That's the one everybody saw over and over again on Twitter. And it's like those are some of the different ways that these decisions are announced.
It's funny that you mentioned that Brian, because I thought the same thing. I was like, well, do I want to say that he's going to be an All-American? Like, do I really want to go down that road? And this is the one time I've ever found myself not wishing, because I don't want people to fly off the freeway while they're driving and listening to this. If Notre Dame was in a conference, I would say that he was going to be an all-conference player. But I wasn't ready to say that he's going to be an All-American. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think he's going to be really good, and I think he would get conference recognition if Notre Dame was in a conference. But I don't know that he's going to be able to get enough recognition to be an All-American, and so that's why I didn't go down that road. If they were in a conference, I would have said Xavier Watts can be a first-team all-conference player.
Sure.
You know what I mean?
Sure.
Yeah. For that exact reason that you said.
Yeah. I dig that. I dig that. It's just going to be, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out, Vince. It's like the position of all the positions. I'm literally kind of speechless. And for me, that's hard.
Yeah, it's impressive.
Yeah. You're like, man, we need to talk about safeties more often.
Words in my mouth. My wife does that for me already. Don't worry.
It's just such I just don't know what to think about it. I really don't. Sure. I don't know what to think about it. So it's going to be solid. That's all I can say. Will it be better than that? You know what I mean?
Right.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. So, well, guess what, everybody? That is going to do it for this part of the podcast, our breakdown of the safety. But so don't go anywhere, because we do have a mailbag coming up. But before we get to the mailbag, make sure you like, subscribe, hit that notification bell, share with your family and friends, jump on the boards. Brian told me before we even started today, already 6 new board members today.
Yeah.
Come on, man. Jump on the train.
If we've had any sign up since we started the show. I don't believe we have. I didn't see any emails from it. No, we have not.
There's nothing
stopping I did get a new house thing, Vince. Five-bedroom house I can send your way.
Okay, sounds good.
Might be a little bit out of both of our price ranges, but hey.
Oh boy. It's fun to look.
Good.
It's always fun to dream. Again, that notification bell is key, folks, because we do have a show scheduled for Saturday. You might forget if you've got that notification bell.
It is a normal team show. Correct. It is not a special show.
That is correct.
Anybody start thinking that there's something more to it than there is.
We are breaking down our final position group on Saturday, which is the tight end position. So make sure you tune in on a nice Saturday afternoon. That is our plan. So make sure you hit that notification bell so that you know. But we are going to, like I said, stick around, because we're going to jump into the mailbag in just one moment. All right, Brian, let's do a little mailbag.
Yeah, I want to start off. It's not necessarily a question, but there was a discussion going on in the chat that I wanted to address and give my opinion. It's just easier for me to do it instead of text it.
I got you.
But there's conversations about like NCAA penalties, and Tennessee was recently hit with an $8 million fine and loss of scholarships and some other things. But a lot of people view it as a slap on the wrist, and to a degree it was, and people are arguing that they should have been banned from the postseason. And then there was this thing about a state senator from Tennessee was going to sue on behalf of players if they got a bowl ban. I have a couple thoughts. Number one is these state legislators are spending way too much freaking time worrying about college athletics than they are like all the other crap going on in our states. Like if you think about all the things that we're being overwhelmed with right now, of all the insanity that's going on in our country, economically, socially, culturally, all these other things, and you guys are going to sue on behalf of players who can't play in an effing bowl game? First of all, you suck. You need to get voted out of Congress or not be an attorney general or whatever that guy would need, because your priorities are effed up. If you're a state legislature worried about NIL laws, you're an idiot. You need to go. You need more serious people in these state legislators. Number one. Number two, he was right in what he was going to argue for. They shouldn't. I hate bowl bans. In my opinion, I hate bowl bans unless the majority of the people responsible are still there. If it's the same coach, the same assistants, the same players, the players that cheated, all this other kind of stuff, then sure, let's go for it. Right? I hate bowl bans, especially when it's a situation where the people getting punished are not the people that were responsible for the violations that you're being penalized for.
Sure.
Right? Number one. Number two is, so if you were to say they can't play in a bowl game, So you're punishing Josh Heupel and his team for sins of the Jeremy Pruitt era. That makes no sense to me.
Right.
Fire anyone still at the school that was part of that. You're done, right? You had flagrant violations. And then suspend anyone from the bowl game who was a player that took that money if you want to do that, or suspend them for 3 games, whatever the case may be. However, when you look at a situation like this, fining them is the way to go. The $8 million fine was the slap on. It was the amount that I had a problem with, right? I really have no problem with the way that they went about. This is the punishment we're going to hand out. It's going to be a financial punishment, not a bowl ban. So here's how it would work for me. We're going to let you play in a bowl game. The only money you can get for the bowl game is money that it costs to cover your expenses. That's it. Players can get whatever things they get from the bowls. You know, they hand out cool stuff and they can get all the swag and all that. Totally fine. The only money you get from the bowl game is the stuff that's going to cover your expenses for going to the game. Every other penny that you get is going to be redistributed to the rest of your league, right? So if you're getting $8 million for a bowl game, you take out whatever it was for expenses, and the rest of that money gets distributed to the league. And then the actual fine should have been way more than $8 million. So I'm going to put you on a 3-year bowl ban. And a bowl ban doesn't mean you can't participate in a bowl game. It means you can't profit from a bowl game. So I'm not going to punish the players. I'm not going to punish the current coaches. You can still go to the college football playoff. You can still go to the Sugar Bowl. You can still play in the Orange Bowl, whatever the case may be. But your institution is not going to financially benefit from it. You're not going to financially benefit from the cheating. And especially if like the AD is still there, if the school president is still there, if you want to not get hit with the big financial sting, like of $20+ million or $30 million, or, you know, you can't make money off, and you can't make any money off of your conference's bowl money. Cause you know, the conferences allocate bowl money. You can't make any of that either. Right. You make zero money off the postseason. Okay. And if you don't want to have that punishment, then whoever was in a position of leadership where there was answers to this, so the head football coach, the athletic director, and the president, if you don't want to get hammered with this, then all those people in that chain need to go if they're that serious of the violations. But what we're not going to do is I'm not going to punish Joe Milton and his teammates who had nothing to do with this whole thing. I'm not punishing Josh Heupel, who was in Central Florida when all this stuff happened. Now, if I have things that I found out that the current coaching staff was part of this, like, and they were a major problem, then fine. You either fire your coach or we're going to do this. Or you don't let the coach in the bowl game. He can't be in the practices or in the game. Either one. I mean, those things you're going to do, but I'm not punishing. I'm so sick of these penalties that punish student athletes. The whole, we're going to take wins away from Notre Dame. We're going to take Reggie Bush's Heisman Trophy away. That's fine because he was the one that broke the rules, right? I know people give Reggie his trophy back, whatever. Like, seriously, we don't have more important things to worry about than whether or not Reggie. We all know Reggie was a monster that year. We all have a picture of Reggie holding the trophy up, whatever. I don't care, right? We all know that Reggie Bush was the Heisman Trophy winner that year. So whatever, move on. Find something more important to talk about. But if it's an individual player that did something, then he should have suffer the consequences, right? But I'm not going to punish all the other players that had nothing to do with it. 4 guys at Notre Dame cheated in that academic situation in 2013. 4. But every kid on that team and all the coaches got punished for it. Even though when the coaches found out about it, they did exactly what you're supposed to do, right?
They self-reported the whole
kids
thing.
Did something dumb. We found out about it. We put a stop to it. We reported it. We did the right thing. And the NCAA said, why do you guys keep reporting yourselves? You guys know we won't do anything if you just shut up and, you know what I mean? Like, it's got to be so egregious. And what Tennessee
take care of it in-house.
So egregious that they had no choice but to go after them.
Right.
Because they were just dumb, handing out money in McDonald's bags. Like, you're an idiot. Right. You know what I mean? Because you know what's going to happen. These kids are going to go to another school, and then that school is going to report you.
Right.
Even though they did the same thing to that kid, right? They just weren't dumb enough to do it the way that you did it. So that's my big thing is there need to be major firings for people that were involved or are responsible for it, right? Huge financial punishments, and I'm talking 7 figures because that's nothing. I'm talking 8-figure punishments, like $20, $30 million punishments, and then remove the ability for those teams to benefit off bowl games for a period of time. Whatever your bowl ban would be during that bowl ban, the ban is you can't financially benefit from the bowl game. That's what it comes down to. Those are the things that I think if they would do that, you'd start getting a lot more regulation. If a school president knows if we get if we get hit with this type of violation under my watch, it's either we get a $30 million fine or I'm fired. If the AD knows that to be true, well, hey, I wasn't involved in it, but you're the boss.
Right.
You're supposed to be in charge of these things. This guy answers to you. He doesn't answer to only God. He answers to you, and you did nothing. And if you didn't know that this was going on, then you're not doing your job, right? And if those guys know that, dude, we're going to get a big eight-figure fine, we can't benefit off bowl games for X amount of years, or we get fired, the school has to sacrifice us, then you know what starts to happen? It's this word, Vince, that I'm not sure if people in college athletics understand what this word is and what it means. It's called accountability. It's this really cool word that coaches use when it comes to the teenagers, but they don't use it for themselves. They're not accountable for things. It's only the young people that are going to school for free, right? That don't get salaries, that don't get 7 and 8 figure salaries. It's they got to be accountable, but we don't.
Mm-hmm.
We don't got to be accountable. Boosters don't got to be accountable. The AD doesn't be accountable. No, just get a little slap on the wrist of you're put on probation. What does that mean? Like LSU got put on probation. What does that mean? Can they still play in the postseason? Yeah. Were they fined very much money? No, not really. So we sacrifice X number of officials. Well, that just means like the 40 kids they bring on campus who they're not going to take anyway, they're just not going to bring onto campus anymore. It's nothing. It's absolutely nothing.
Right.
So there's no accountability. The NCAA has created a system of no accountability, right? And so you want to stop this stuff? Start making the punishments a lot harsher. Don't give me some $8 million fine. Give me a $24 million fine. Triple it. Don't let them benefit. We're not going to punish the kids. Not going to do a bowl ban, but you can't make any money off bowl games. That's how this stuff changes. But nobody has an interest in that, actually. Nobody actually cares about this.
Right.
I mean, $8 million, dude, they'll get the boosters that were giving them the money to pay players are going to give them that $8 million like that. That's fine. Here you go. No big deal. They're going to like $30 million. It's a little bit different animal. You know what I mean? And that's the stuff that they need to do. It's an absolute joke. And but that's why I'm against bowl bans, because bowl bans punish the people who weren't actually primarily responsible for whatever they're getting in trouble for. And that's what I get tired of. So that's kind of my mailbag intro rant that was being discussed in the chat. That's why I'm very, very much against bowl bans. Very much against bowl bans, unless again the culprits are that team.
Sure.
So let's just say hypothetically that take this Northwestern situation, and let's say they find out that this really bad hazing stuff, and they find all these things, and it's like half the team. You have a choice: either take a ban, or kick those kids off the. Then it's like, okay, but it's the people there that are there now are the ones responsible for it. So then I'm more sympathetic to some sort of punishment to the current team, because it's
right.
And it's like, well, I didn't do it, but you knew about it and you didn't do anything about it. Right. It's kind of like if you're at a party and you see some dude doing something to a female and you say, well, I saw it happen, but I didn't do it. Well, you didn't do anything to stop it. So you're not a man, and you let it happen. You're not as responsible, but you're still responsible.
Just as guilty. Sorry.
Because you're not a man. You didn't step up and say, hey, bro, that ain't okay.
Right.
Right. So to me, that's kind of how I look at these type of things, Vince, is unless it's that current group of people, bowl bans to me are just punishing the wrong people for it. And so I would have been okay if somebody would have said, hey, we're going to fight this. I just feel like, all the stuff going on in our country, and these legislators are worried about bowl bans and NIL and all this other kind of crap. And it's just like, this is why nobody trusts you all. This is why people hate politics, because it's crap like this. You can get a bill passed on NIL, but we can't get a bill passed on all these other things that are facing our country. Give me a break. Give me an absolute break.
I've always believed that coaches who get involved in this kind of stuff, like the punishment should follow them wherever they end up going. And it can expire.
Well, and that actually happens a decent amount.
Okay, and it can expire after X amount of years, right? Yeah. I mean, however long it is, but you're probably not going to get hired in that amount of time either. You know what I mean? And so, yeah.
I think like Chip Kelly might have had something like that when he went to UCLA. there's been some things like that. But yes, yeah, that yeah. If you're a college and you want to hire Jeremy Pruitt as your head coach, that's cool. But the
This
punishments that we
comes
would have
with it.
given Tennessee
Yeah.
are come with them.
You're hiring
right?
this baggage too.
Yeah.
Right.
Right. So yeah, I'm with that. I'm with that. All right, now let's get to some more questions, Vince.
Okay.
We actually do have some questions now.
We got a super chat from Raymond. Thanks, Raymond. Great solo show yesterday, Brian, and the intel was awesome. Thank you, and keep up the great work. Go.
Thank you
Irish.
very much, Raymond. Dude, my voice was shot by the end of that show yesterday.
Was it really?
Completely shot, yeah. It was. I did drink a lot of tea
today.
afterwards. Yeah. Thank you for being here with me today, Vince. Appreciate you.
From Paulie B27, if we fail to land KVA, do we still have a shot to land Shaw? If not, what changes do you think need to be made to the defensive staff?
Well, I just think that they need to do a better job. I don't get into the whole changing the staff. I think there needs to be a change in accountability. Again, we talk about this, right? Like, hey, look, I did this, I did that, I did this other thing, and it's just like, the reality is you didn't get the job done. So either you need to do a better job, or if you're telling me that you did the best you can and this is your results, then I need to find something to do a better job, right? But to me, again, I'm just someone who doesn't believe that firing is always the right answer, especially if the defense is as good. I'll say this again. If the Notre Dame defense goes out there and is as good as I think it's going to be this year, you're going to tell me you're going to fire 3 of your assistant coaches from that defense because you don't think they recruited well enough? No, there needs to be a level of accountability to that. But that accountability can also come down and sit there and say, hey, because of this, hey, great job coaching, but you and I are going to be having weekly meetings about this thing and that thing, and we're going to get into some aspects of this that we need to make sure that you're getting this job done. If you need more help with something, then there needs to be communication. With other coaches, it's like without Washington, it's like, look, we need to figure out how we don't miss on Justin Scott. But hey, keep doing what you're doing at defensive end, right? Because you give me Cole Mullins, Logan Thomas, and Bryce Young every year, we can roll like that, right? And then if you coach better, then we're gonna have a chance to close on some of these guys down the road. Without Golden, it's more of a, dude, why are you involved with some kids and not others? Like, you're paid to do this job. So this has got to be more a part of what you're trying to do. And if you don't want to recruit, then that's cool. Go to the NFL. But like, you're here and I need you to take this more seriously. If you feel that's the problem, I'm just giving an example. If you feel that's a problem, right? But it's not always just about, fire a guy, and so, we'll see how that plays out. But right now, all I care about with the defensive staff is put a top 10 defense on the field.
Okay.
Don't care about anything else. I mean, honestly, recruiting, you do that, and recruiting to a degree takes care of itself.
Yep.
Honestly.
I could not disagree. I mean, could not agree with you more. I mean, and we've always talked about it, right? When we have these recruiting shows and we talk about this, that, and the other, and to me, it always comes down to, if they have a big year in 23, a lot of this is going to take care of itself. A lot of it is, and I'm not saying that coaches don't need to work harder and, all of that. Yes, that is all true. There's no doubt about that. But you're telling me that if you arm these coaches with a 10-2, 11-1, whatever season,
especially if it's like a
college playoff season, like that kind of a thing, and then you add that to their arsenal of recruiting, that they're not going to be able to land some big fish. Come on. Like, absolutely they are. So yes, this season is huge. It's absolutely huge recruiting.
Right.
Rob Osgood, safety recruiting has been a topic of discussion. What do you need to see on the recruiting side this next cycle to relieve doubt? I'm not asking for 3 top 50 guys, but realistic expectations.
I mean, to me, it's 2/3 of what you got this year. I mean, if you give me a safety class next year that has a guy on the same level as Bronte Johnson and a guy on the same level as Kennedy Urlacher, but your third guy is a top 100 guy, then you're there. I mean, you're there. Chris O'Leary's not as far off as we want him to be, especially with the Bronte Johnson thing. However, I still say I think Bronte coming to Notre Dame was more about Bronte than it was the position coach, if we're being honest.
Right.
But if next year you go get a Bronte Johnson who isn't as easy to get or doesn't have that deep burning desire to be here like Bronte did, who's a unique case, then sure, that's it. Just overall, you just got to start winning you got to start. Because like in recruiting, you have like kind of like an A group and a B group. The B group is usually good players. Like, I'm not talking like plan B. Like, those are C group guys.
Sure.
You have an A group and a B group. And your goal is, hey, look, we need at least one guy from this A group, right? And the rest of our class may be from the B group. But we need at least those. And those are the really impact, top of the level, top 50 to 75 national player type of guys. That's the A group, right? And I'm not talking about ranking wise, but like your evaluation, like just the best of the best, right? Cam Williams is an A group guy. Got to get at least one of those guys. And then give me I need a guy that's from this B group. And the B group is a smaller group of players too. And then there's the C group, which is the if we miss, we go here, right? But you need at least one from the A group. And so if he can go out next year and get me another guy from the A group and then a couple B group guys, then sure, I'm feeling better about things.
Yeah.
I am. And with Coach Washington, it's just like, dude, keep doing what you're doing at defensive end. Just I need you to just be a little bit more impactful on interior guys.
Sure.
That's
Sure.
really the thing. But if you're getting back-to-back DN classes of Boubacar Traore and Armel Mukam and Brendan Vernon, who committed before Coach Washington was hired, and then you follow that up with Logan Thomas and Cole Mullins and Bryce Young every year, all right, we're cooking. And then if these guys start developing in how you think they're going to develop, then all of a sudden you start getting those top 100 guys and top 50 guys. Because although I think Cole Mullins is a top 100 guy, you start getting those elite players. You start getting the Elijah Rushings and the guys like that because now you're putting dudes in the NFL. And that's where the production starts helping out.
Sure.
With that. So we'll see. Yeah. Yep. So let's get to the next question, Vince. So we got one down here that I wanted to get to.
Oh, nice.
Right there.
From Zach, thoughts on Logan Saldate as a player?
I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his last name.
Okay.
I'm not going to talk a whole lot about him today. We'll have more on him tomorrow. But he's a good player. If you haven't watched this film, check it out. He's a wide receiver from California, 2024 kid, about 5'11", 180. Has a 10.8 track time, 24.5-inch long jump. Just really good. Sort of like Caleb Williams. He's a slot guy. He's really smooth. Has good long speed, plays faster than he looks. He's one of those really smooth guys, Vince, that doesn't look as fast as you think he is because he's so smooth. Really good, surprisingly good ball skills for a guy that's 5'11" because he looks pretty long. Like he looks at pretty long arms. He's a good football player, very productive, comes from good school. I like him. I'm currently committed to Washington State or Oregon State. Washington's recruiting him as well. So we'll talk more about him tomorrow.
So he's a 24 kid.
24 kid.
Oh,
he's
okay.
a good player.
I didn't realize they were still. Well, they got to replace, right? That's
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yep. So no doubt. Let's move on to the next one here.
T Guns over under 6.5 interceptions, 1.5 pick sixes, 15.5 passes defended, and 2.5 forced fumbles, half a game ceiling interceptions. I'm assuming he means from the rain. Just read a text message. Excuse me. From the safeties.
I'm sorry. So Ansel just came down with Rita. And Rita, come here. And it's storming. So Ansel's trying to hand me the bed so I can put it under here so Rita can go in there. But of course, that's why
I was reading a text from my wife that said,
"No one she'll come." Yeah,
we ended up getting the rain that we were set to get, and I was like,
"Yeah,
okay."
Yeah.
So
sorry,
we're both dealing with the same thing, and I'm like,
"Yeah."
So plan on cutting the grass today.
So to Tommy's question, over under on 6.5 interceptions.
So is this from the secondary or the safeties?
I would imagine safeties. I mean, but this gets us close to Vince, the number we talked about, right? So if you have 6.5, if you get the over and you go 7, and then get the over on the pass defended, it's 16. That's 23. That's close to what my bold prediction was, which is a third of it. So to me, I'm gonna go over on the interceptions.
Okay.
And under on the passes defended, because I think you have one or the other, right? You either have a mess of breakups and then not as many interceptions, or it kind of goes like this a little bit. So I'm going to go over on the interceptions. So if I'm going to say triple, right? I said triple. My bold prediction was triple.
Yeah, you did.
That's 7 to 21. I'm going to say it's not going to be 18 breakups and 3 picks. I think it'd be more like 7 interceptions and 14 breakups, something like that.
Okay,
would be my over under. So I'd go over picks, under defensed. If I were to go under interceptions, then I would go over on the passes defensed.
Yep.
2.5 forced fumbles. I sure hope it's over. And then half on the game stealing interceptions. I'm going to go over because I'm going to say they're going to have 1. Kind of like a Harrison Smith against USC in 2010 type of deal.
What'd you do with the pick sixes? Did you just say that one?
No, I didn't.
1.5.
I'm going under. I mean, those
Okay.
are so rare. I mean, you'd have to have 2 pick sixes in a year
Yeah,
at one position. I'm definitely going under on that one.
sure. I hope it's over on interceptions. I just have my gut feeling says that it'll be under, but I'm going the opposite of you, and I'm going to say over on the passes defended. I'm hoping that they're just a little bit more athletic, a little bit more handsy, making that happen, that kind of a deal. So I'm going to go under on interceptions, over on passes defended. I'm going to go under on pick sixes because I think pick sixes are also almost luck at times more than skill. You know what I mean? It just so much has to go right for a pick six. That's what I'll say. So I'm going to say the under there.
Multiples of them. That's tough. That's
right.
Tough. Although Julian Love did in 17, didn't he? He had 2 pick sixes. He had one against NC State and one against Michigan State.
And they had 2 pick sixes.
He almost had 3
yesterday from the secondary, but not from last year from the secondary, because you had one from didn't Brandon Joseph get a pick six?
Joseph had one against Syracuse, and then Benjamin Morrison
against Clemson. So you had 2 last year, but they were from different position groups.
Right.
So,
one corner, one safety.
Right.
Go ahead.
The forced fumbles, I feel like over, and then I think over on the game sealing interceptions, because I also think that leads a little bit to interpretation as well. There's a lot that could go under game sealing, so I'll take the over.
Part of me on that, Vince, with the interceptions versus passes defense, part of the reason that I do think that they're going to be there closer, that I feel better about the interception number, is because of the corners. I mean, number 2, and it's twofold. Number 1 is there's going to be 2 or 3 interceptions this year, I predict, that are off of tip balls that, Cam Hart or Benjamin Morrison makes a play, ball floats up in the air, Ramon or Xavier picks it off, right?
Because they're going to be in
good on a
position
safety
to do so.
because you're in position to make that play.
Yep.
And then the other part of it comes down to you're going to get tested more, so you've got to make those plays. And if the pressure's better, I think because in against a zone, if you're a zone team and you're good at putting pressure on the quarterback like Notre Dame was in 2018, your corners benefit because those quick balls come out and they're going to attack the flat. So, Michigan State tries to throw quick against Julian Love and he steps in front of it and picks it off, right? Ryan, forget the guy's last name, that Ryan Finley scrambles. He's forced out of the pocket. He tries to throw it outfield. Julian Love picks him off, takes it back, right? So when you're a zone team, your corners benefit from that. When you're a man team that plays an aggressive man defense like Notre Dame does, then your safeties tend to benefit from the quick game when you're getting good pressure on the quarterback. Where they throw hot on a quick inside slant, it throws high because he's got a guy in his face. It goes up in the air and boom, the safety picks it off, right? Plays like that. Yep. You think of the interception that South Carolina had against Notre Dame. I believe that was a safety. It was off of a tip ball. Safety picks it off and takes it back, right? So I think you're going to see more of those things where the quarterback's throwing hot over the middle to get rid of the football, and the safeties are the ones and that's where they need to be. That's what Notre Dame needs to do more of, is where when the ball is getting out quickly, like it did last year, you're making more plays in the football,
right?
And that's where they need to be. And so I think the 2 people that'll benefit the most of this is the safeties as a group, and I think Cam Hart needs to also catch more of those balls. That if Cam just would have caught the balls, hit him in the hands, he's got 3 interceptions last year. So that's where you need to be. So good questions.
I like Tommy's over-unders. All right, Archer.
You're fun.
Do you think Notre Dame would ever sell tickets to fall camp practices? Ohio State is selling tickets for practices on 8-3 and 8-4, and I would absolutely go if I could.
Notre Dame will eventually do something like that, I would imagine.
I agree.
I would not. I'm not a fan of that, to be honest with you. This isn't the National Football League. I'm also a former coach, so I have a little bit of that paranoia in me. I don't want to waste a practice, and I'm not doing everything that I'm going to normally do if I'm going to have 20,000 people in the stands or even 1,000 people in the stands, right?
That's what the spring game's for.
Like, here's what every team's going to do. Hey, get someone. Hey, call your buddy, who's a coach that's a high school coach or something, or a D3 coach, and have them go to that practice and and see what we can do and scout. Let us know what they're doing. Right. Yeah, I would not do something like that. Notre
Dame's close though. They're close to it because they are doing, like, it's not an open practice, but they're doing a practice at like a local high school. You know what I mean? And so it's not like Culver where it was kind of like a closed camp situation.
They only did that for like 5 days.
Right.
Like,
No, I'm just Culver's a high school. That's the only connection that would be. And that's a closed situation, but they're going out into the community and they're having an open practice. Now it also happens to be the same open practice that we get to be at. Right. So it's like, I don't know that they would ever sell tickets for it though. This isn't the NFL. I don't know. I don't know that they would ever sell tickets, but I feel like they're branching out a little bit more than they ever have before, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I think for me too, also, Vince, they've done things in the past. They've like allowed faculty and stuff to come, which is fine. That's a little bit of a different deal. You have to show your faculty ID and all that kind of stuff. I'm okay with stuff like that. If they were to do something where they would let students come, whatever. I mean, that'd be kind of a fun, like a loose late fall camp, Friday practice. You're going to have some fun. Remember that time that Kelly allowed us to be at practice and they like were wearing different jerseys and they were just having fun. And it was like, seriously, this is one of the practices you're giving us access to. You're wasting my time with this. Like, come on, man.
No surprise there.
But I just look, I'm a believer that the fans are a big part of this game, right? It's just one of those things where when they bring us to a practice, there's certain things they can ask us to do and not to do and monitor it. Like, listen, can you not talk about specific plays? Can you not, like, they've had to ask me this before because, like, I'd first started going, they were running this coverage and they ran this pass concept, and I was giving real specifics because that's what I know, and they asked me not to do that, and I explained it. It made total sense. Like, yeah, I get it. Okay, sure, totally understand.
Right.
And because you don't want stuff getting out there. Well, they can control that to a degree because they can see what I'm writing and listen to our shows. But when you've got like 10,000 fans in a sense, how in the world do you control what they do and don't tweet or post or do whatever after the fact or during or whatever? Who's going to be there monitoring, making sure there's not someone sneaking a video camera in there and recording practice? It'd be so hard to monitor that. I wouldn't want. I would be, if I was a coach at Notre Dame, I'd be totally against that. And here's the thing: like, are you really hurting that much for money that you need to do that?
Right. That's a good point there.
You're really hurting for money that much that you need to do that to charge a few bucks to get people to come to a practice? Like, oh man, I'm good. Chisel off a little just bit of that dome and sell that, you know what I mean? And you'll be good if you need that extra money. You know what I mean? Like, you're gonna be fine. I know 4 boosters you can call and get whatever, and they'll give you right now whatever it is you made on selling tickets to that practice. I promise you. You know what I mean? Like,
and they don't need to. They're also not at a point just to build on what you're saying. They're not at a point where they need to build a fan base either.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, and I'm all for giving more access to fans. Like I told you about why we're not allowed to give the schedule out for practices. I think that's ridiculous and anti-fan.
Well, you didn't tell me why.
Absurd. Oh, I'll tell you.
Okay, yeah, you didn't tell me why.
I'll say it now. Basically, what I was told is they don't want fans to know when the practices are, so they don't want fans showing up to get a glimpse of the team or to get autographs or whatever, which I think is absurd.
But how are they going to do that? They've got that place like Fort Knox. Like, it's all.
But I mean, so what? Oh, God forbid that little 9-year-old that gets gets to meet his favorite player, whatever.
Right.
Anyway,
right.
Different conversation for a different day.
Yep.
Wow. But there are certain things fans don't have a right to be at. To me.
Sure.
And it's never, I've never seen more than like 8 to 10 fans outside of a practice. Like, come on, dude, you're acting like, y'all the Beatles and you're, running out to practice to hordes of hundreds and thousands of people. Like, come on, bro. But there are certain things that I just don't think fans necessarily have a right to, or should have. Like I've said, I don't want any cameras in the locker room at halftime and during the pregame speech and all that. Like,
it just makes it so fake.
That's not a place for the media. That's not a place for fans. That is their world.
That's their sanctuary.
Now, if there's things where like, hey, Notre Dame wants to record something to use for their own promotional thing, that's up to them. But I wouldn't have it to where like NBC's doing that.
I hate it.
There's just certain aspects of that. I'm not a fan of reporters in the locker room. I know the professional sports. I just feel like that's their sacred space that we don't have a right to. And I think practice is a place where, I do think there needs to be access to practice in certain ways. I've said, put out more video. I mean, every single day of fall camp, Notre Dame's media team needs to put out some minute-long video. I mean, you can do it in a way where people don't really know what you're doing, but the fans love it. They eat it up. They see the catch. They see the run. Whatever. And you're not giving away plays.
Right.
You're not giving away who's out there. Do a mic'd up with a different coach during fall camp. Do it, those different things. Do a mic'd up where one of your former players is coming to practice. Tim Brown's at practice, and mic him up and put that out afterwards and something. Like, I think they should be doing stuff like that from every practice. But, like, that's not really giving people the insider. I think we should be allowed to be at practice to a degree and say, hey, look, you can talk about this, this, and this, but there's certain things you can or can't talk about. If they wanted to do an open practice where it was going to be kind of like a fun, just little, they're going to go out there and do certain things, and it's a, lighter doing some one-on-ones. It's not going to be like a team. Like, if you have those, those lower days where you're not, then I'd be kind of okay with that if it was going to be something like that. I mean, so that's a scenario I could kind of live. We're not doing any team today. We're not doing any 7-on-7. We're going to do one-on-ones. We're going to do some, some things over here. It's not really given a whole lot, but that's harder to do nowadays because you have so few practices and so few opportunities. To me, I wish they would extend fall camp by like a week. I think they should get more time in fall camp to really spend more time, get the kids ready, make sure everybody's in condition, just get all that. I wish there was a little bit more time. Then I would have a little bit more of a, fan day. Hey, we're gonna extend every team by a week. The thing that we ask is that you have 2 fan days during that period of time.
Sure.
So we'll give you 5 extra practices if you also have 2 fan days. And the fan days can be, something where it's a fun day. You go out there, you have a nice little easy workout. It's like that half speed thing. You do some one-on-ones. You go through drills,
7-on-7, something like.
And then afterwards, you sign autographs for kids, or
Right.
something like that, and something like that. I mean, that'd be kind of, Coach Freeman addresses the crowd.
Right.
Players address the crowd, almost kind of like it's a pep rally type of thing. Yeah, that'd be, have the band there, playing during practice instead of having the music on over the. I mean, okay, cool, but you better give me some extra practices if you want me to do something like that, right? And so, yeah, those are things again I would do if I was, NCAA king or college football king. Be something I would do.
I would love
nice
to be on
trade
Twitter.
Off.
The day that you become the college football king, I want to be on Twitter at all the changes that are rolling down the pike.
Yeah.
Be fun.
Yep. Agree.
David Lowe. I went back and looked at Notre Dame recruiting classes over the years and didn't realize Charlie Weiss had 3 top 5 classes in a row. What happened in that span of those years? Just bad development?
Oh, I mean, to a degree, yeah. But a lot of those kids that they recruited that were ranked high were part of the 2012 team.
Good point.
Right? I mean, so, yeah. 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Yeah, so like the 5th-year seniors were part of that. So, yeah, it's bad development. Charlie Weiss was a bad developer. I mean, we've talked about that a million times.
I mean, that's
why
why
he got fired.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. And this also shows the flaws in the recruiting rankings, because every single one of Charlie's highly ranked classes had misses.
Absolutely.
They had a bunch of 5 stars at like quarterback, receiver, tight
They're all
end.
offensive.
Right. And you were coming up short on offensive line. They weren't as good on offensive line. Your linebacker classes weren't that good until Manti in 19 or 09. You were having great corner classes, but your safety class would be bad. And there are always these holes in the class, but because they had 5 stars, the rankings go up and boom,
sure.
Everybody thinks it's a phenomenal class. Notre Dame has had, to me, the 2023 class, the current freshman class, was better than any class that Charlie Weiss had, because this class had fewer holes.
Right.
Now, maybe it didn't have as many 5 stars, but it had fewer holes. And so those are some things I look at and say, give me a class that's really good with no holes than a class that has 4 elite players, but I'm short on offensive linemen, short on linebackers, short on defensive tackles. Right. So to me, those are not elite classes. And this is the problem that I have with those recruiting rankings, is it goes right back down to it. I mean, you look at the 2008 class, for example, which was a class that finished ranked number 2. Right. It was ranked number 2 because you had a 5-star tight end, you had a 5-star receiver, you had a 5-star quarterback, you had a top 100 running back in Jonas Gray, you had another top 250 receiver in Deion Walker, and you had some highly ranked DBs. Ethan Johnson, but your defensive tackles in that class were Sean Swinar, who's a good player, but like top 250 guy, but not a star. Hafiz Williams and Brandon Newman. That was your linebacker class, or your defensive tackle class. That's not a number 2 overall in the country defensive tackle class, right? You signed one corner in that class, Robert Bland. That was it. You had 2 safeties. So you don't even have your number 2 ranked recruiting class doesn't even have the ability to put a starting lineup on the field because you only signed one corner, right? Your outside linebackers were pretty good. Steve Filer and Darius Fleming. As recruits, they were very good recruits. Your inside linebackers were Anthony McDonald, who was solid, and David Puzlesny, who shouldn't have been on scholarship at Notre Dame. So your O-line class was Trevor Robinson was good. Lane Cleveland was okay. Braxton Cave was good. And then Mike Golick, it was a good offensive line class, but not a number 2 overall class in the country good. Right. So you had holes. You had holes at pretty important positions, corner, defensive tackle, inside linebacker. And when you're a 3-4 team and you're coming up, kind of short on inside linebackers, that's kind of a big deal. And the other thing too is 3 of your 4 signees on your offensive line class were interior players. You only signed 1 tackle. So again, it was a class that came up short. The previous year's class was the same thing. The 07 class, you had Deval Kamara was highly ranked. You had Armando Allen was highly ranked. Robert Hughes, Jimmy Clausen was a 5-star. And then you look at it and you're like, you signed 1 defensive tackle and 1 defensive end. Top 10 recruiting class, you had Golden Tate in that class. Harrison Smith was in that class. But you signed 1 defensive end, and he was an outside linebacker, and 1 defensive tackle. Now, again, he was a good player in Ian Williams. But you can't have a top 5 recruiting class when you do that. You had 1 big-time offensive lineman, Matt Romine. Your other offensive linemen were Taylor Dever, who was a solid player, liked him, Andrew Nuss, who I didn't think that was good, and then Emeka Nwankwo. That was your offensive line class. Your inside linebacker class was Steve Pascors, Aaron Nagel, and Brian Smith. That's not a very good inside. So this is your defensive class. Aaron Nagel, Brian Smith, Ian Williams, Kerry Neal, Gary Gray, Steve Pascors, and Harrison Smith. There's some really good players in there. But you signed 3, 4. You only signed 8 defensive players, 7 defensive players. Only 7. How in your offensive line class was questionable. It was a class dominated by quarterback, running back, wide receiver, and tight end. That's the flaw in the system, right? And this is what I continue to point out. The 2006 class, Vince, same thing. It was a highly ranked class. Your wide receivers in that, and it was dominated by different positions. James Alders was ranked really high. You had an offensive line class that had Sam Young was a 5-star player. But Darren Wall. You had a really good corner class, in my opinion. You had Darren Walls and Rayshawn McNeil, but your safeties were shaky. You signed Sergio Brown, Jashad Gaines, and Leonard Gordon. Not great. Your defensive end class was John Ryan and Kellen Wade. Your linebackers were Torian Smith and Mo Richardson, right? Your quarterbacks were highly ranked, Demetrius Jones and Zach Frazier. James Alders ranked really high. Your tight ends you had Conrad Rulin, who was a highly ranked guy. But then your receiver class was Barry Gallup, Robbie Paris, and Richard Jackson, and George West. That was your receiver class. So again, highly ranked class that Notre Dame fans would have been in love with because it was ranked high, that had major flaws because it was the points-based systems that put way too much emphasis on highly ranked players and don't take into account, did you meet your needs? Did you fill out all your positions? Can you even put a starting lineup on the freaking field on one side of the ball? Right? Those things don't get taken into account. And so people obsess over recruiting rankings and say, well, did he just not develop well? Those were you're assuming that because they had 3 top 5 classes that all of a sudden they had great talent. And I just went through and pointed out to you hole after hole after hole after hole because rankings are irrelevant. Did you build a roster the right way? And the answer is no, you didn't. You were great at recruiting quarterbacks and running backs and receivers in some years. You had a couple good years at corner, but as far as putting a class together, you did not do a good job of building a team. But according to Rivals and 247, those were great classes. No, they weren't. Because you couldn't put an offensive line together that could play championship football. You couldn't put a defensive tackle and interior inside linebacker group together that played championship football. You didn't recruit enough safeties to go play championship football, right? That's why you weren't a championship football team. You had big-time talent. You had receivers that put up monster numbers, right? Because here's the thing. The guys that were ranked really high, the 5 stars, actually produced. Jimmy Clausen was a heck of a player at Notre Dame. Michael Floyd was a great player at Notre Dame. Golden Tate was a great player at Notre Dame. Harrison Smith was a great player at Notre Dame, right? Mike Ragone was not, but he had some injuries. But you had other guys that stepped up. Kyle Rudolph was a heck of a player at Notre Dame. So a lot of your highly ranked guys panned out. Your team still sucked. So you developed your 5 stars. They were good. But what was Notre Dame's problem? Bad offensive line play, not great defensive lines, inside linebackers are shaky. You had too many holes. Well, why couldn't they put good linebackers in the field? Because for 3 years in a row, you didn't sign any good inside linebackers. Your best signee was Anthony McDonald. So it wasn't until you got Manti in 2009 that you had that. Well, by that point in time, Charlie's career was over. Right? And so, you look at it that way, Vince, and you say, that's why I don't care about recruiting rankings. Because those are 3 very highly ranked. Oh, Notre Dame's recruiting great. No, they're not. Because they're coming up short here. They're coming up short there.
Right.
They're coming up short here. And you can't win that way. Because, you may have a great offense with Jimmy Clausen, but then you go play USC and they have a great offense and you're trying to stop him with Steve Pascores and, Kerry Neal, who's a solid player, but you don't have enough weapons on defense to stop them. They're recruiting big-time players on defense so they can stop you, and that's how you lose. Because every game they lost in 2009 was by a one-possession game. Every single loss, I believe. Am I correct on that? I'm pretty sure, Vince, that every single loss that Notre Dame had in 2009 was a single possession loss. So let's see. They lost to Michigan by 4. They lost to USC by a touchdown. They lost to Navy by 2. They lost to Pitt by 5. They lost to UConn by 3 in double overtime, and they lost to Stanford by a touchdown. What's the difference between you losing all those games and you winning all those games? It's not necessarily development, which Charlie wasn't good at, is you didn't recruit enough good players to make stops at certain positions or to block in a certain way or do whatever you needed to do because you had a big-time quarterback, big-time receivers, highly ranked guys at running back. But you came up short at too many positions, so you weren't as good of a football team. Notre Dame would have dominated 7-on-7 tournaments in Charlie's last 2 years.
No doubt.
They could have played with anybody. And that's why their recruiting classes were ranked high in 07 and 08, because they got a bunch of skilled players on offense. They had way too many holes. So I'm not even just pointing to other people that, hey, look, it's other schools. They're not as good. Notre Dame is an example of that too. And I point this out over and over and over and over again, and people still just say, well, gee, what was wrong here? Well, how about you dig into the classes and look for yourself? You tell me if that was a championship class. What was missing? And that's how it should always be. Say, man,
right.
You could say, hey, Notre Dame's class was ranked 12th. Okay, you tell me what the hole is and was in last year's class. You tell me, we didn't get a Viper. Okay, well, they kind of did. But, yeah, okay, sure. All right. Still signed 3 defensive ends. Still signed 4 defensive linemen. You can put a starting defensive line on the field. Well, they missed out on a 3rd safety. Yeah, you're right. They did. They can still put a starting secondary on the field. Right? Well, I wish they would have got one more of this. Yeah, but they still can put a starting offensive line on the field. Notre Dame's last year's team could put 2 starting 11s on the field from what they recruited last year. Right?
It's recruiting the whole roster.
I would have liked to have also landed a Jimmy Clausen. I would have also liked to have landed this, that, and the other. But some of those guys I think were that. Okay, with all due respect, Jaden Osbury and Drake Bowen should have been ranked way higher. Right? They should have. Jaden Greathouse should have been ranked way higher. And those things are going to impact the rankings. This is my whole point. Do you want that 23 class that doesn't have any 5 stars that can literally put a starting 11 on the field on both sides of the ball? Or do you want the top 5 class that if you try to put that defensive line on the field, you're going to give up 250 rushing yards a game? But hey, you have a great 5-star quarterback that equals X number of points. That's not how you build a football team. Bama builds football teams because they recruit incredibly well. Georgia's best defensive lineman or most highly drafted defensive lineman from their 2021 team was a 3-star recruit, Jordan Davis. Right? Wouldn't have been fired up about him when they signed him if you only cared about recruiting rankings. So again, I feel like I'm a broken record on this, but it keeps getting asked, right? Like it was asked in a different way this way, but they weren't really top 5 classes. If you go back and look at them. And I fell for that at the time because I'd see the top 5, and this is when I was just getting into following recruiting events. Wow, top 5 class. But then you start to study it more and you're like, well,
You dig in, yeah.
You're banking on Torian Smith and Mo Richardson to be your dudes. Like, I don't know, that kind of negates the fact that you signed Jimmy Clausen and, and Michael Floyd because you better score 40 a game because you're going to be giving up a lot of points. And that's exactly what happened.
Welcome to Wake Forest.
Yeah. But, that's if Jimmy didn't play perfect in 09, they lost.
Right.
And that's the frustrating aspect of this whole thing is this rant number 2 today, man, like in this mailbag.
You're on fire.
So, yeah. Whatever. Let's move on.
Patrick Earwood. Vincent Bryan. What do y'all think of Ole Miss being the only staff in the country being able to help players with mental health? That's not true at all.
I'm not familiar with this.
What do you mean? So, only staff being able to? What does that mean exactly?
Yeah,
because there's plenty of teams that have mental health professionals as part of the staff or part of the athletic department, etc. So I don't really know. Did they all get like certified to?
I guess Ole Miss became the first program to implement mental health training.
That's not true.
Well, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know what that means. Look, maybe from the coaching, I don't know what this means. Here's what I do know. I have a lot of issues with Brian Kelly. Y'all know that. But Brian Kelly was ahead of the curve on this.
He was.
That's what Amber Selking's entire job was at Notre Dame. And from what I heard, the players liked her a lot. I mean,
sure.
They respected her. They would go talk because she was an outlet for them. They could talk to her.
Right.
And she would help them with different things. And it was mental health. I mean, I don't know if she was a psychiatrist or not. I don't know what her specific. She had some sort of professional training.
She has a PhD. She was a doctor.
Right. I just don't know what she was.
Sports psychology, I believe, because she came and spoke to all the coaches in the district that I used to work in. So,
right. Like I knew I don't know what she was, but I knew she had some sort of training for it.
Yep.
And that was Brian Kelly. I mean, that was the thing that Brian Kelly did well. Now, I understand that you needed to move on and you wanted to try to get rid of, but there should have been a replacement for her at Notre Dame. I don't know if there was or wasn't.
I don't know.
But and you've heard us talk about this a lot. So no, Lane Kiffin. I mean, if like this is something that I don't know what they're saying about the only staff, or I don't know enough about the story. I just read some headline about they becoming leaders in mental health and all that. But I believe Amber Selking went with Brian Kelly to LSU. Correct?
100%. I've seen her.
So LSU has that now, and that's what that's mental health. That's what she does.
And she was at Notre Dame for years.
Right.
So
for all my issues with Brian Kelly, that's not one that I'm going to criticize him for. That's an area that I think he has done a good job of providing those resources. And I wish he would do more things to connect with players. But that's something Brian Kelly's been doing for a while. I mean, she's been with them since 13, 14. Like she's been there for a while. She's been with Brian Kelly for about a decade.
Yeah. Yep.
And has had a very, I always felt sometimes she maybe had a little bit too prominent of a role. I mean, that's kind of something I like, we don't need to be going to her for everything. She's not a coach, right?
She was on the sidelines. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
But, I mean, that was Brian Kelly giving her, helping the person understand, like, look, this is an important person that has my ear, that if you talk to her, she'll come to me. Now, she wouldn't go and say, hey, so-and-so said that she'll come say, hey, listen, talking to the players, this is a theme that I hear a lot. They're struggling with this. They need, and then Brian Kelly can say, okay, well, how do we implement those changes to help them out in our program? It wasn't like I talked to Johnny Jones and he said, you're yelling at him too much. It wasn't like that, right? And nor should it be. Right. But yeah, with all due respect, Brian Kelly's been doing this for a minute. So that would mean Lane Kiffin and them, and props to them. Props to them. This is something that more teams should be taking. Mental health for soldiers is something that I've talked about, is a big thing that we're not, that as a country, we're failing our troops that are coming over fighting in the war. We're not doing more for them to help with that transition. But I've also felt in my specific universe that we're not doing enough for these young people when it comes to their mental health. And when you think about all that's being thrown at them, NIL, social media, all the different things, they're so much more visible now.
Right.
And we just assume because this guy is 6'4" and 245 pounds of nothing but muscle, and runs a 4.5, that he should be just as strong up here as he is physically. And that's not always the case. Even the strongest physical people can struggle with depression, anxiety, don't know how to deal with a situation going on at home. Their mom is sick. Like, it's why I've always had such great respect for Kurt Heinisch, to deal with what he dealt with at Notre Dame with his dad and that sickness and all that kind of stuff. It's why I have such a great respect for what Jaden Mickey's going through right now, with his mom's battle with cancer and all that. And you're like, I don't know how I would have handled that as an 18-year-old. Probably not well.
Mm-hmm.
And there need to be outlets besides just your position coach to go do that. And so props to Ole Miss for taking that seriously, however they're doing it, but that's not a new thing. I mean, we need more of it. So I'm all for bringing publicity to it, but this is something Brian Kelly's been doing for about a decade, first at Notre Dame and now at LSU. But I am cool that I'm happy it's being talked about, because I do think this is something that we need to have more of a discussion about as an industry, as a sport, to say, hey guys, it's okay for these kids need to know it's okay. There's being soft, but then there's just being human.
Mm-hmm.
Like some kids, dude, you're soft. Like every little thing you go cry and you're just soft, like toughen up. Right. But in a lot of instances, like this is a hard kid that's struggling to open up and he won't talk to me about what's going on. He needs someone to be able to open up to.
Sure.
And there's still a little bit of this, or even I'll say a little bit more, a little bit. There's still this persona of, to be a man, you've got to suck it up and bury it down deep. And like, there's a time and a place for that. Like, just you're going to be good, man. It's power through. But then there's a time and a place where it's like, this kid's 19 years old and I'm 45, Vince, right? Like, so if I'm going through some, dude, I know how to I'm good. I can handle it. I've been through this before. But when a 19-year-old is going through some of this stuff, it's like, he may not know how to handle it. He's away from home. He doesn't have that foundation he's always had. He may not know what to do. There needs to be clear resources to say, hey man, look, you're struggling, bro. This is what you do. Right. And there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing wrong with that. And that's where leadership can be a big part of it. But I do think there needs to be more awareness, because I don't think we appreciate just how much these kids go through. It's so much. The college athletes have always had to deal with a lot, workouts and all, but it's all the other crap that's now on their shoulders. They're having to negotiate $1 million deals, or what an 18-year-old should. So what are we going to do? Let's make sure that we have people in place that can say, hey, we're going to help you with that. And we're going to help get you through that. And, we're going to help you deal with the stress that comes with that. And I'm a big fan of that. But Brian Kelly's been doing this for a while. And that's something Brian Kelly deserves a lot of praise for.
Agreed.
Is that he has taken that seriously for a while.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you feel that way too, Vince. Like, I know she had that job, but like that Brian Kelly put value in that when he did Notre Dame and is doing it at LSU.
No, he absolutely did. Yeah, he absolutely did.
All right, let's go to the next one.
Irish Guardian.
Let's just say this. There's a chance, folks, that we're going to lose with the storm that we just saw at Flickr, Vince.
I was wondering what that was. Yeah, okay.
We're in the same neighborhood, so if power goes out, we may be done. We're going to power through. So far, it's been good, but just in case we go away.
You flickered, and I was like, uh-oh.
Yeah, and then you flickered for me, too. So,
which
may have been on my end, but yeah.
Either way.
So, just to be a heads up.
This is a classic case if it takes two to tango. So,
that's right. So if I go, Vince, man, just power through, baby. But if we both go, see y'all tomorrow.
Right.
So,
Irish Guardian not.
I'm sorry. We didn't get to that one yet. Sorry.
Nope. Is it possible to use the versatility of the cornerback room to help mask some of the blind spots at the safety position, especially Hart and Morrison being so rangy?
I'm with you on the first part, not on the second. I am not taking away Cam Hart and Benjamin Morrison to help out safety, because now you've robbed Peter to pay Paul, so to speak.
You can't do that
old expression. However, this is why we've advocated for a guy that I would absolutely put at safety. Is I would have put Clarence Lewis back there. I flat out would have put him back there. Ryan Barnes is maybe a guy that could get a chance to go back there, although Clarence would be my number one pick. So yes, when you look at how deep Notre Dame is at corner, and if you're struggling at safety, you need to move somebody. And there are guys that could make that move. I think Chance Tucker in some areas could help out at safety as maybe a middle of the field guy, not as a guy that's going to come down and run thump all day, right?
Right.
But could you go into a game where, hey, Chance are emergency safety and we're just going to go play cover 1 and cover 3 because Chance can play the middle of the field? Sure. Okay. I can get you out of a game, right? And, some things like that. But I would absolutely tap into my cornerback depth chart, especially – as you kind of, next year when you get Leonard Moore and Carson Hobbs on campus, and then you've had some consistency, because now you've got depth, but, you've got young depth as well. But, and it also would mean at that point in time, you'll know if Christian Gray is the guy you think he's going to be. You're going to have a better idea who Jaden Mickey is, who Micah Bell is, to where you'll be in a better position to say, hey, look, chance, we really need to help you. You're too good not to play, but you're going to be our fourth corner. So let's get you over here because you can help us over here playing center field, something like that, right? I would certainly look into. And we've already talked to we've had shows about Clarence Lewis.
I mean, yeah, we've been advocating for this for a while. So, yes, you can do that for sure.
Absolutely.
Insured by Big. Even as an LSU fan, I am shocked to see the lack of excitement for Notre Dame this year. Wow. I've already placed bets on the over and playoff appearance for Notre Dame. Do you prefer being the underdog as a fan? I do.
Yes and no. Yes. Here's the thing. I think he's correct. There's not a lot of excitement about Notre Dame, even from some Notre Dame fans. I mean, I had to literally do a show about why I'm excited about this team because I felt like there's just too much negativity going on. But there's a lot of some of these over-unders on Notre Dame. You're like, whoa, wow, that's a very interesting over-under. Man, sometimes I wish I gambled because there's definitely some lines I'd be throwing a few C notes on this year, Vince. Notre Dame's over-under. Sam Hartman win the Heisman. If Notre Dame has the year, I think they can. If they don't, I'm out a few $100. If they do, Christmas is going to be good in the Driscoll household this year.
I put a very small wager on Notre Dame to win the national championship because the odds were just so astronomical. That I was like,
you put $100 down, you're gonna make yourself a lot of money.
I definitely didn't do that, but it's a lot. It's very little to win a lot, and I was like, you know what? There's a chance here, man, and I'm gonna take it. So yeah.
So those are just things that I look at and say, man, this is going to be a really interesting conversation to have. So we'll see how it all plays out. But here's the thing, Vince. I like when they're the underdog in that I don't know. I kind of like having that chip on my shoulder, like they don't respect us kind of thing, right? Like that's kind of like part of being a Notre Dame fan.
Sure.
But I actually kind of like that they don't like us more than they don't respect us. That's the part that bothers me. It's that lack of respect. I like being the underdog. I don't like being disrespected, if that makes sense.
Sure.
And right now, I kind of feel like there's this level of disrespect, and it's a lazy disrespect. Well, they don't have speed. Notre Dame has problems. That's not one of them. But that comes from Notre Dame fans.
Right.
J.D. Bertrand's slow. J.D. Bertrand has issues that he needs to fix, but Jack Kaiser has areas he needs to fix, but that ain't one of them.
Right?
Exactly. But that's just, they don't have speed. And then they play these teams like, man, we're surprised at how fast they were. Well, duh. This isn't 2002 anymore.
Right.
You know what I mean? Or 1999 anymore. We're learning like three fast guys and then a bunch of just, this isn't the Ty Willingham era. Charlie Weiss has had speed on offense, not on defense. I get it. There's been times when that is true. It's not now. Right. And so, there doesn't mean there aren't issues. It just means it's the disrespect I don't like. I kind of like being undervalued, right? I kind of like being that we don't like Notre Dame. Cool. I like that. I don't want you to like us. We're going to go out and dominate you. Right. But it's just it's a weird situation. Very weird situation. I'm also a little frustrated with T-Gun or with Archer. Right.
Oh, no.
Because he's talking about all the top players from Georgia that are going to other schools, and he did not mention Cole Mullins. We're going to have words, my friend. We're going to have words because Cole Mullins is a dude. I'm just kind of busting Archer's chops a little bit. But, yeah, I don't really care that there's not a lot of excitement outside, Vince. Where I get frustrated is when some parts of the Notre Dame faithful aren't excited.
Sure.
It's like, guys, this is the time to be excited. It's the offseason.
And it's
This
okay.
is the time to be excited. So it's
okay.
exactly, Vince. It's okay to be excited.
Yeah.
I get why some don't want to.
Right.
Because it's like I've been, especially older folks, because that live through the glory years. Like I just don't want to think that those are coming back and then get my heart broken again. I get it.
Yeah. Sometimes there's a section of Notre Dame fans though that I think just want to be miserable too. Like they just want to focus on the negative all the time, and it's frustrating to see all the time. Allow yourself to be happy. It's okay. It's okay. I just want to go give him a hug. It's okay.
Yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Let's keep rolling, Vince.
Mark Avalone. Let's see here. From both a quarterback and safety perspective, close to goal line, how do each handle RPO? Speed it up or slowed the decision down?
Well, there's a lot of things that go into that, Mark. It depends on the circumstance, right? There's going to be some times when it's going to be a quick decision. If I'm running some kind of RPO where I'm releasing a quick slide out to the flats, that's a pretty quick decision because you want to get the ball out quick enough to where before the defense can recover. If you're doing some sort of spread RPO kind of concept where you're going to throw hot off of a side, that ball's got to come out quickly. Other RPO concepts near the goal line are going to be a lot slower. If you're going 13, 14 personnel and you're running like like more of a full read where a guy's going to block down and then maybe sneak behind, that's going to take a little bit longer to develop. So really what it comes down to is it's about timing, and proper timing is key to a good RPO. And the timing of it is going to depend on what concept you're running against what looks.
Sure.
And so it can be either or, Mark. It just depends on the concept that you're trying to run. It really just comes down to the keys are if you have leverage, it's going to be quick. If you have to read it out to wait for a post-snap movement, then it's going to take longer. Does that make sense? So like if I know that we've got leverage out here and as soon I'm taking that quick flash fake and I'm throwing it out there before
pre-snap read. That's what you're talking about.
Exactly. Basically. Yeah. If it's a post-snap read where I've got that overhang guy and whether I'm going to throw the speed out or not, I got to ride that sucker out. And if that guy stays, then I'm handing off. If that guy comes in, then I got to quickly get it out there. But that takes more time.
Sure.
I think that's a good way of putting it, Vince, because leverage read is basically a pre-snap read.
Right.
So am I pre-snap reading this RPO or am I post-snap reading this RPO? That's a good way of putting it, Vince.
Yeah.
Very good way.
Yep. And a lot of post-snap RPOs are very similar to like triple option, for example. And I know you don't want to talk about triple option, but
no, that's the kind of triple option I like. I don't like the veer and that crap.
But you've got to. But a lot of that triple option stuff is you've got to this. Okay, if you're reading the end, if you're reading the defensive end, if he crashes, then you're pulling. If he stays where he's at, then you're giving. But that's all post-snap. It's what he does in the moment, and you've got to wait it out. I mean, and that's a post-snap situation. So that's going to look like a slower situation than a pre-snap read where, man, we've got numbers over here. We know we have numbers. I got to get the ball out, and I got to do it right now. So, yeah, pre-snap versus post-snap. Absolutely. Holtz, my beer. Cam Hart and Ben Morrison is a solid cornerback tandem. I would say that's
understatement.
Yeah. Question though, what are the chances Christian Gray and Micah Bell see the field regularly this season? I'm super high on those two as well. Depends on what your definition of regularly is and where at.
I would think that it would require an injury for them to be regulars, especially Micah Bell. Christian Gray has a chance to get on the field. He would be the one that I would say have a chance, but as a tandem, very slim. Yeah. Very slim.
Mm-hmm. Agreed.
Yeah. Very
Could they be on the field together in mop-up duty, that kind of stuff? Maybe.
But even then, you're probably getting like Chance Tucker and
Jaden Mickey.
Yeah.
Potentially.
Well, Jaden Mickey's going to play a ton. Yeah. But yeah.
Caleb Collins, are we running Tommy Reese's offense, but with more of a focus on RPOs, or is it a whole new system?
But it's neither.
Right.
If I had to pick what it's closer to the former. Former's always the first one, right? I always get that backwards. Former's the first one, latter's the last one. Okay.
Yep.
It's going to be closer to Tommy Reese's offense with more RPOs than it is a whole new system.
Right.
There's going to be things you're going to see that are going to be like, oh yeah, I've seen that play before, but it's going to have a much different spin on it this year. That's all I'm going to say. Like there, and really what it comes down to is it's an emphasis different where if, I have 30 pass concepts and last year we used these 17, this year I'm going to use 8 of the 13 we didn't use and then 9 of the others, right? It's going to look a lot different, but you're still going to see some similarities. Tommy Reese is going to have calls he likes on third down. Jared Parker's going to have calls he likes on third down, and they're probably not going to be the same. That's always true. I mean, you take 2 great coordinators. I mean, Lane Kiffin and Steve Sarkisian, both great. They're going to have very different likes and dislikes and plays that they like, even though they're both effective. So this isn't like, Tommy Reese had stupid third down calls, and Jared Parker's going to have good third down calls. It's just different calls. right? Tommy Reese had certain things he liked to do in the red zone, formationally, structurally, play call wise, and Jared Parker's probably going to have some differences in that regard. Now, there are going to be concepts that were there for both of them. It's just going to be different, and also it's different personnel. I mean, Tommy Reese's the last year's offense would have looked a lot different if Sam Hartman was his quarterback all year. Let's be honest about that.
Sure.
It would have looked a lot different if Tobias was a sophomore and you didn't have Michael Mayer and Jaden was a junior and Dion was a junior, basically meaning if Tommy Reese didn't leave, the offense this year would look a lot different than it would have last year.
Yep.
Because the personnel is different. So part of the differences that you're going to see, Caleb, is the personnel on offense has changed. And we would have seen differences from Coach Reese as well. I mean, if you go look at the 2021 offense, it looks nothing like the 2022 offense. Same dude, different quarterback, different receivers, no Kevin Austin, no Kyron Williams, no Jack Cohn, a better offensive line. I mean, if Tommy Reese would have tried to run the Clemson game plan in 2021, Notre Dame would have got murdered because they couldn't run the ball like that.
Right.
They couldn't beat people like that. The 2022 team could, right? If Notre Dame this past season against Clemson would have tried to use the game plan that they used in 2021 against Florida State or USC, which was more pass-oriented, they'd have got slaughtered because they couldn't do that. Personnel is different. So that's going to be a factor into it too. So not only is it going to have Jared Parker's personality and likes and dislikes compared to Coach Reese's, it's going to look different because the personnel is different, which is going to make it look like a whole new system, but it's really not. It's a lot of the same stuff. There's just a much greater emphasis on certain things and stresses on certain things that we didn't see last year, right? So does that make sense, Vince?
Makes sense to me.
You think that's
absolutely.
fair?
Yeah, absolutely.
Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I think to the naked eye, it's going to be similar, right? I do think that. Now, people that understand RPOs and what they look like, it's going to look different because they're going to do more of them, right? But the terminology, and now we don't hear the terminology, right? I mean, they kept a lot of the things the same to ease the transition from one offense to another. Mm-hmm. And so that's where I would say running Tommy Reese's offense, I mean, they're keeping it as similar as possible from terminology and all of that, so they don't have to learn something that's brand new, right? I mean, this isn't the NFL where they've got 20 hours a day to install a brand new offense, right? So there's going to be similarities. The formations are going to be similar, things of that nature, but the actual nuts and bolts and how they get to things and how they do some different things, like that's where you're going to see some differences for sure,
Right.
And will it be obvious to some people? I mean, I'm not trying to say people are stupid and they're not going to notice the difference. I'm not saying that at all, but there's going to be differences. And I think they are going to be noticeable.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting. I can't wait to see what this offense is going to look like. I really can't.
Oh, I'm telling you, it's the pinball machine, man. That's the vision I get. It's the pinball machine. Bling, 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 bling. Just rolling up those points, man. Which safety will have the first touchdown from Tommy Guns?
It'll be who we don't think it is.
Right.
So it'll be like DJ Brown.
Mm-hmm.
Or, so, it won't be like Xavier Watts or Ramon Henderson. It'll be like DJ Brown, pick scoops and scores on a fumble. Right, which would be great. I would love to see. Awesome. I would love to see it. I want to see more defensive touchdowns, or at least defense. Like I was watching, it was it's a 93 opener against Northwestern. So I was watching some film of past seasons recently, and first play of the game against Northwestern. I'm trying to remember the quarterback's last name was Lynn something, but Northwestern quarterback throws a pass, bats in the air. Pete Bursich picks it off and runs back for a touchdown. Talk about like, hey, this kind of symbolizes what's about to happen.
Right.
Yeah. With this football team, and he ended up winning that game. But I mean, I think defensive touchdowns and special teams touchdowns are two of the biggest game changers in football. I mean, they're just
hate the fact that special teams has become devalued not by Notre Dame. I'm not saying that, but like
definitely not.
But just from in college football in general, it just feels like, and the rules have helped that.
Correct.
Okay, I want to be clear on that. The rules have definitely helped that, but I just hate the way special teams has been devalued because special teams can just change the everything about a game. A return touchdown, a block. I mean, how many times did a block punt change last year? I mean,
Right.
change the game and the momentum and all.
How
long was it 7-0
many.
in the Clemson Notre Dame game because of that block punt touchdown?
So second half of the second quarter. I mean, it was
exactly.
For a while.
Like
Clemson game was that way, right? I mean, or Syracuse game was that way.
Yes.
Syracuse was starting to claw back a little bit. Notre Dame blocks that punt, recovered at the 3, and score a couple plays later. I mean, those things are huge.
Right.
I think of the USC game in 2015 when Equanimous St. Brown was it. I feel like Amir blocked it and EQ scooped it up, or EQ blocked it, and I forget how it happened, but like the scoop and score that Equanimous St. Brown had in 2015. I mean, We've seen things like that. Think of the Chris Tyree Wisconsin game. If Chris Tyree doesn't take that kickback to the house in 2021 against Wisconsin, Wisconsin had gained all the momentum. Jack Cohen had just been knocked out of the game. Drew had just gotten sacked and fumbled the ball, and Wisconsin took a fourth quarter lead, and then boom, just like that, Chris Tyree just takes all the air, and then Wisconsin never recovered from that. Like they were so excited, and then the immediate dejection, they never recovered from that.
Right, and it was because of that return.
Yeah, and I think of the Fiesta Bowl in 2015. Part of the reason Notre Dame had no chance of beating Ohio State is because they had to go 85-plus yards every time they touched the ball, because how good the coverage units were for Ohio State and how bad the return team was for Notre Dame.
Sure.
I mean, there was one time they kicked off, I think, in Pendo, Notre Dame, inside the 10 on a kickoff.
Right.
It was at least inside the 15 multiple times. Like, that's great. That's game-changing coverage.
Yep.
Now, if you have an elite defense, if I have Georgia's 2021 defense, I'm kicking the ball out of the end zone every time and making you go 75 yards because I don't really care about trying to pin you back 5-10 extra yards, because I don't think you go 75. I don't need to worry about trying to make the mistake of giving up a return. One bad lane fit, and all of a sudden that SEC returner's taking that sucker back to the house.
Right.
But I also value the coaches that do try to do that, because the best teams still put value in that, Vince. I mean, what hurt LSU last year a couple times really
special teams
crushed by special teams,
killed them.
They were starting to make a little bit of a comeback against Georgia. I mean, Georgia hadn't completely wiped them out yet. That field goal gets blocked, and Georgia's players were prepared to know to pick it up and score. LSU's were not.
Correct.
And
absolutely.
Game over.
Let me ask you a question. When you think, I'm going to give you a player name, and I want you to tell me what you think of when I tell you this player's name. Tom Zbikowski.
Great dynamic special teams guy.
Yeah.
And clutch guy. Yeah.
Right. Like, I don't think of him lining up as a safety. I think of him returning punts or, something along like that. That's what I think of.
Well,
and so
the first thing I think of when I think of Tommy Zbikowski, it's usually a play. And it's the punt return against USC.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Absolutely. And I mean, he became a Notre Dame legend. Let's be honest. He's a Notre Dame legend. He became a Notre Dame legend because of what he did on special teams.
Primarily. I mean, he did have some big plays on defense too. He had some pick sixes and some big hits. But yeah, I mean, his most impactful plays at Notre Dame were punt returns.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, he had some big ones in 06 as well. Didn't he have a punt return? Was it North Carolina, Tennessee? I forget. But yeah, Tom Zbikowski, he had I'm trying to remember, Vince. He had another one in 2006, I believe. He had a punt return for a touchdown as well. I'm trying to find it. But yeah, I mean, think of Rocket Ismail.
Absolutely.
I mean, Rocket had some huge plays on offense, but when we think of Rocket, what do we primarily think of?
Think of kick returns, I mean,
yeah. And I think of the kick return against Miami in 1990. I think of the two kick returns against Michigan that won that game.
Yep.
And I mean, they don't beat Michigan in 1989 if he doesn't have 89 if he doesn't have the two punt returns for touchdowns. I mean, those things are huge. They're absolutely huge. Look, honestly, special teams is partly why Charles Woodson won the Heisman. Now, he also played offense.
Yeah.
But it's also partly why he won the Heisman, because he had a punt return. He had some big returns that year too. But I'm looking at Tommy's numbers. Here's what's crazy. He never played offense, and he had, 7 touchdowns in his career.
Unbelievable.
Because he had 2 fumble returns for a touchdown. He had 2 pick sixes for touchdowns, both in 2005, and he had 3 punt returns for touchdowns, 2 in 05 and then another one in 2006. So yeah, he was like, you take those away, he still remembered, but does he remember quite as much?
Right. Exactly. And that's my point. Like that's like I think he hits legendary status because of special teams, which is just making our point that special teams are important and special teams can turn the tide of a game and turn the tide of a season and turn the tide of a player's career.
Right.
That's absolutely my point.
Right. I have a funny story about Tom Zbikowski. I
Oh,
don't know
yeah?
if I've told this one before, but I was actually at the Bowling Green camp when Urban Meyer was there. I was working at camp.
Story. Yeah.
Yeah, and Zbikowski was there, and there was a do you remember what year the movie Pearl Harbor came out?
Oh man, no.
01.
Okay.
And the actors were Josh Hartnett and Ben Affleck.
Yep.
And there was this kid at camp that Zbikowski was buddies with, and the kid looked a lot like Ben Affleck, and Zbikowski looks like Josh Hartnett. And so we just, like, me and Dan Mullen, some other guys were like messing with him, like, you know, the Pearl Harbor dudes, right? It was pretty funny. He was a really good player, man. But yeah, he was a good player. He's a good player. I just feel like his legendary status has made him, I think, perceived as an even better player than he was.
No doubt about it.
Like, he was a good player.
Sure.
But he was a guy that was a little limited in coverage, you know, and I would put him at Rover. I know not everybody agrees with that, but I absolutely would put him at Rover because, like,
it minimizes what he wasn't
close to the ball.
Yeah, it minimizes what he wasn't
close to the football.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. He'd be a dynamic guy doing that. I think he'd be a really good player doing that.
Agreed.
And then you're limiting the one thing he's not good at, which is deep coverage. Why is he not good at deep coverage? Because he always wants to come downhill and hit people. Because Tommy was fast. He wanted to come. He was too aggressive. He wanted to come down and hit people. That's why he wasn't good in coverage. But yeah, which safety on the first TD? Hopefully, we saw plenty of those with Tommy. He had 4, defensive touchdowns in his career. But to your point, I remember the special teams touchdowns more than I remember the defensive touchdowns.
Absolutely, because he did it when it was just clutch. I mean,
that punt. So the punt returning at USC, I've told you this story, right? Like, we had a game that day, and I had my video guy set up because, like, it was back when you could put, like, VCRs. You could plug the VCRs in the cable, and you get the basic cable.
Yep.
And then he would turn the VCR channel to NBC. And so as soon as the game was, I'm like quickly shaking hands. I'm like, okay. I'm boom, sprinting the locker room. And I get into the film room, and the Notre Dame USC game is up on the big screen, right? And as soon as I get there and said, I'm like, okay, Zbikowski fields that punt against USC and takes it back. And so I'm screaming, I'm going nuts, right? And everybody's like, man, he's really excited about that win today. I'm like, I don't give a crap about that. Like, that team's fucked. We knew we were going to kill them. I care about this. So I think we were playing Chowan that day, and we, like, absolutely blew them out. Actually, you know what? Now I'm going to think about it, Vince. Now I want to remember what team that was that we were playing, because we smashed them.
It was October of 2005.
Yeah. Do you remember see what the day of the game was? It was, I'm looking at it now. It was October 15th.
Okay.
So I'm actually going to look at CNU's schedule that year. So that was 05. I'm pretty sure we were playing Chowan that day. Let me just look at it. I hope I'm right, because otherwise I'm going to look like an idiot. 2005. It was, what did I say? It was October what? 15th?
October 15th, yeah.
We were playing Chowan. We beat them 47-26. So and they were terrible. So
you let them score 26 on you? Come on, man.
I played offense. I was an offensive coach, dude, right? I mean, we hung 47 on them. What do you want from me, Vince? What do you want from me? So, anyway. So yeah, fun times.
Wade Garrett, what would you need to see out of the Notre Dame the first few games to have confidence you can beat Ohio State?
Well, I want to see that the offensive line is still good, and I want to see that the defense is less big plays, more disruptive. I want to see a disruptive defense that's assignment correct, and I want to see an offense that can still control the line of scrimmage. Like, I know, like, and we'll talk about this as we get closer to the season. I don't think the offense is going to come out in the first 3 games and average 60 points a game. I think they'll, probably do something against Navy. They'll put a lot of points on the board against Tennessee State just because the talent differential. I don't know what they're going to do against NC State. It may take them a few games to get everybody on the same page, but it's all building towards that Ohio State game. Now, you just got to do enough to win against NC. I mean, that's the whole goal against NC State, survive and advance. That's it. I mean, I don't care that you score 48 against NC State. That's going to be hard to do even if you were clicking at full speed. Tony Gibson's defense is not one that you can just go roll a million points on, right? Just do what you got to do to win and keep building. And then you work out some of the kinks the next week against Central Michigan. But the offensive line needs to get rocking and rolling sooner than it did last year, because you're building on the Harry Hiestand foundation, not the Jeff Quinn foundation, like Coach Hiestand was working with. And I need to see the defense play, because the defense should pretty much come out hot. Number one, defense is always better early in the season than the offense. That's usually the case, right? When you're in fall camp and stuff. But you've got a ton of dudes coming back on defense. I mean, almost your entire starting lineup from the bowl game is back.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. You missed Tariq Bracy and Justin Adamiola. That's it. Jordan Patejo was back. Howard Cross is back. Riley Mills is back. Your three linebackers are back. Benjamin Morrison's back. Ramon Henderson's back. Xavier Watts is back. DJ Brown's back. They were your kind of trio. And the only reason Tariq Bracy started at corner in that game is because Cam Hart was out with an injury.
Right.
So you returned just about everything from your last game you played in. So defense should be better early. If the defense takes 4 games to get going, I'm going to be really nervous.
Yeah.
I'm not going to be like, the light's going to go on against the Buckeyes.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'm going to be very nervous.
Disruptive is the key word for me defensively, and consistency on the offensive line to / domination. If I'm being honest, like I need to see some serious continuity with that offensive line, whoever it is. I don't even care who it is, but whoever's in that starting group, number one, hopefully they've all played all the games. And I want to see some serious consistency, if not domination, from the offensive line. So if I see those two things, offensive line and disruption from the defense, I'm going to feel really good. Because again, they're going to score. Like I know Notre Dame is going to score points. They are. But I want them to be able to score points the way they want to score points, right? Like run the ball, cool, we're running the ball. Throw the ball, cool, we're throwing the ball. Like I don't want the defense to be able to dictate to the offense, and a lot of that has to do with what the offensive line is going to be able to do. So that's my offensive side, and then
there's going to be some miscommunications in the pass game the first couple games. That's just going to happen.
Sure, yeah, no doubt.
You got a quarterback, all that kind of stuff. Exactly.
Archer, ESPN FPI projected every game for Notre Dame. Oh, this ought to be good. Having them with less than 50% win odds in 2 games, Ohio State and Clemson, and project a final record of 9-3 with college football playoff odds at 15.8%. Thoughts and reactions?
I hate the FPI.
It's terrible.
No, actually, no, that's not FPI. No, it's SP Plus or whatever.
Oh, that's the one that goes through ESPN. Yeah, I just saw ESPN and I was like,
So I'm okay with this, actually. I'm okay with this because it's a computer-generated model that you're basically kind of doing it off of what's been, right? I mean, Notre Dame lost to Stanford and Marshall last year, so I'm not going to get pissed that they have them losing to a team that right now you don't have them with less than 50% odds. If you're doing odds, why? Like, do I think Notre Dame's going to be better than Ohio State this year? I do. Do I think Notre Dame's going to beat Ohio State this year? I do. Do I think anyone that says Ohio State has better odds to win that game is out of their minds? No. Why? Because Notre Dame hasn't won against Ohio State in all the times they've played. They haven't proven that they can consistently win these types of games. Now, look, yes, they did well against Clemson last year. But with all due respect to Clemson last year is not going to be as good as Ohio State's going to be this year. They're just not. They weren't as good as Ohio State last year. So Notre Dame's got to prove they can win those games, Vince, right? And as good as the Clemson game was last year, Notre Dame lost both of their really good road games by double digits. They lost both of them by 11. So how can I sit there and say, well, they're going to beat Clemson based on what? Well, they beat Clemson last year. A, not the same teams. B, you're playing them on the road. You weren't as good on the road in those big games as you were at home in the big games last year. That's just a fact. So if we're looking at what Notre Dame has been, I think that's a fair thought and reaction, especially for people that don't necessarily study the team the way that we do. I think they're going to be better than that. So if you're asking me my personal opinion on what is my prediction relative to that, my prediction is much more optimistic. I'm at 11-1 right now.
But if you're just feeding stats and information into a computer,
I have no problem with 9-3.
I get that.
Less than 50% against Ohio State and Clemson, right? I'm okay with that. And then basically, either they used to lose to USC or some other team you're not expecting. Well, you can't tell me you can't be mad when a team that lost to Stanford at home and Marshall at home is being tasked with, well, you got to prove to me you can win all those games you're supposed to win. They haven't done that yet under this head coach. And I think the record would be the same if it was Brian Kelly here. It would just be you're going to lose to USC, Ohio State, and Clemson because you don't beat teams that are better than you under Brian Kelly. But you win all the games you're supposed to, right?
Right.
So those are the things that I look at, Vince. I'm comfortable with that. That doesn't offend me. That's fair. I think they're going to be better than that, but I'm not going to be mad. We've talked about it. Notre Dame has to prove that they can be the team I think they're capable of being. They have to prove that to people. There's no question about it. I just think they're going to. So mine is projection. But if I were to come up with any kind of formula that's going to take into account last year's results, I'm not getting 11-1 kicked out to me.
Right.
There's no system that exists that way. Or should exist that way. And if you do, then I'm like, because there's nothing extraordinary about they return an extraordinary amount of production or they return an extraordinary amount of depth starters related to everybody else. They do at certain key positions.
Sure.
But, they lost their all-time sack leader. They lost the main only weapon they had in the pass game. I get all that. I'm cool with that. I can live with that, Vince. It's not my prediction, but I'm good with that. Now, if you just said like 8-4, now we're getting into silly territory, right?
Sure. Right.
Because like now you're thinking they're going to, I can't go. They're going to lose all the big games. Well, they didn't lose all the big games last year. They at least won one of the ones at home, which means if you're going to say Notre Dame is exactly like they were last year, they lose to Clemson, they lose to Ohio State, and they beat USC.
Right.
Or they beat Ohio State and lose to USC and Clemson. Like 1-2. That's what they did last year. Right. And then they're going to lose to somebody they're not supposed to. Okay. That's fair because that's what they did last year. Twice.
Right. Sure.
And so even if you're banking for an improvement, 9-3 is an improvement. So you're going to have Sam Hartman this year, right? So that's why I'm going 9-3, not 8-4.
Right.
Right. So I mean, I'm cool. I'm cool with that. I think they're going to be better than that though. But I'm cool with them kicking that out.
Insured by Big. Are y'all more excited about the run game or the passing game this year?
I'm more excited by the passing game because I think the passing game is going to do so much more to help the running game. Like,
right.
We know that Notre Dame can run the football.
Absolutely.
I mean, we know that. We watched them do that against a Clemson team with 2 first-round draft picks on the D-line, and Clemson knew what was coming.
Yes.
Right. There's nothing worse in sports than when this is what me and a buddy last night were talking about, like Larry Bird. We're talking about like players talking trash and all this kind of stuff. And we were talking about, Larry Bird walking into the locker room at the first 3-point contest. And he just looks around. He's like, I'm just trying to see who's coming in second. I'm like, that's some arrogance right there. But he was like, but that's Larry Bird. Like Larry Bird can do that. Right. But you listen to all these stories about how he would tell people, like one of my favorite stories, Jamal Bashburn would tell the story. This is the year after Bird retired. They were a part of the dream team. Rodney Rogers, who was a college star at the time of Wake Forest, great player, says to Larry Bird, according to Jamal Bashburn, he says, hey, Larry, you haven't hit a shot since 84. Now, let's ignore the ignorance of the fact that the Celtics had won a title since then.
Right.
And Larry Bird had won MVPs since then. That's beside the point. Young buck talking trash. So what Mashburn said is Magic heard that. So then when they went out to scrimmage the next day, Magic fed Larry like 8-9 possessions in a row. And Larry scored on every single one. But the worst part was he was telling Rodney Rogers what he was going to do. Spin, baseline, step back, bucket. Left hand, corner, glass, and he would tell him what he was going to do and then do it. And this is when he had already retired. But like, there's so many stories about that. But like, there's nothing worse in sports than when I know what's coming and there's nothing I can do.
Nothing you can do about it.
It's just like, that's the most demoralizing thing. And that's what happened to Clemson last year. That won't happen again this year. They're going to have to do more balance against Clemson. That's not going to happen against Ohio State this year. That was a unique game, unique environment, unique situation, and they just were on. Great game plan, all of it.
Sure.
But the point is we know they can do that. Can they go out there and make the throws, make the plays in the throwing game to beat Ohio State? to take
Sure.
pressure off the run game, so then the run game can get going. If Ohio State's going to say, hey, look, you're not going to beat us running the football, does Notre Dame have the ability to say, okay, cool, then we'll beat you this way? USC
Notre Dame hasn't been that team.
Right.
Long
USC
time.
did that.
Yeah.
They said, you're not going to beat us running. Your O-line is not going to beat us. Audric Estime and Logan Diggs are not going to beat us. You're going to have to beat us with Drew Pine and Lorenzo Styles and those guys. And guess what? They couldn't.
Couldn't do it.
They put up yards. Drew went 23 of 26, but he had 2 huge mistakes that cost them. That played a role in costing them the game. I'm not putting it. You gave up 38 points. That game's not on true.
Right.
But they knew they could score, and they knew you couldn't once they got that lead. And Drew wasn't able to make enough plays to get them back in the game.
Sure.
There was the fumble, the interception.
The fumble was big.
So they were going to make Drew Pine beat him, and he couldn't. Right. And that's what teams are going to if I was smart, I would kind of have that same mentality this year. Yeah, they got Sam Hardman, but I mean, I'm going to make Tobias Merriweather beat me. I'm going to make Chris Tyree show that he's a wide receiver. I'm going to make Jaden Thomas. I'm not letting Audric Estime and Joe Alt and Blake Fisher beat me. I'm not. I'm going to stop the run and pressure the quarterback and make those receivers.
Which is a great strategy, by the way, against this team of what other people know about this team going coming into the season.
Yeah,
absolutely.
They got to prove it. So that's why the pass game has got me more excited, because if they can actually throw the ball like I think and hope they can, this offense is going to be a lot more balanced.
Yeah. Caleb Collins, is Al Golden going to simplify the defense?
Well, sort of, not any more than he did the second half of last season.
Right.
I mean, I don't think you necessarily need to do it more. They did simplify it a little bit last season. There are things I'd like to see them simplify a little bit. I would like to see them actually get a little bit more, and Coach Freeman talked about this. I'd like to see them get more complex with what they do pre-snap. Show a lot more coverage looks than they did last year. I think that's something too, is they ran a lot of different coverages, but they couldn't show a lot of different looks. I would say they ran a lot of coverages. They couldn't run a lot of looks. It was easier to kind of get an idea of what they're going to do coverage-wise. Sure. This year, I think you can disguise stuff a little bit more. I think you get a little bit better with the timing. I think it's really an execution thing. But to me, this is the year that you don't simplify, because you have so much experience coming back. Like, it's kind of like, well, now's not the time to simplify. Last year was, you know what I mean? So, but they did scale some things back in the second half of the year, which is why the numbers were so much better, which I pointed out yesterday. I don't know if you had a chance to watch yesterday's show or not, Vince, but with those numbers I showed on the defense, I mean, the Notre Dame defense last year in the last 6 games of the season against a non-option team was fantastic. It was absolutely fantastic. I'm gonna bring those numbers up again just to remind people of this. But like, guys, we saw this last year, and it's about carrying over what they showed last year. And to me, I don't think you necessarily need to do that to simplify. Now, I think there needs to be things that you do that make sure that, hey, it can't be so complex that I can't get Jalen Snead on the field, that I can't get Nolan Ziegler on the field, that I can't get Ben Minnick on the field, that I can't get, pick a younger guy that needs to play, Josh Burnham, Junior Tuihalamaka. It can't be that. But we started to see that late last year. I mean, that's Notre Dame's production against non-option teams from UNLV on. 4 of the 6 teams they played during that stretch were ranked opponents. 3 of them finished the season ranked. And they're top 15 in almost every category in either yards or per attempt. And even the ones that they were lower on, they were 27th and 28th in yards against the pass, 28th in yards per attempt. They were top 15 nationally in total yards allowed, yards per play allowed. They were top 5 in tackles for loss per game and sacks per game. They were 7th in the country in yards per attempt allowed in the passing game. Like, that's what we need to see. Carry this over into the season. And that included, it's like, well, but they didn't do that against USC. Correct. Why? Because against USC, what was the one thing they didn't do in that game? Play their game.
Right.
They tried to create some new defense for USC instead of saying, here's who we are. I'm going to make you beat us doing what we do. Right. And I somewhat understand it, but this year you hope that they can better do that. And I think part of it was because you didn't have Tariq Bracy and Cam Hart.
Correct. I was just going
to. You couldn't just line up and play.
Those are going to be the next words out of my mouth. They had to scheme around not having 2 of their best defensive players. Right. I mean, let's be honest, right? So
they felt around should have been involved stopping the run. Vince. And we talked about that before the game, dude. We talked about that in our show. I know you guys talked about it. You got to make them one-dimensional. And you
Correct.
can't give up over 200 rushing yards per game and think you're going to beat USC. It's not going to happen.
Got a super chat from Michael Mahoney. Thank you very much, Michael. Brian, 10 reasons to be excited. That was your show yesterday, right?
Yeah.
He says, great work, man.
Thanks,
so
buddy.
You got Michael excited.
I appreciate that, Michael. I enjoyed doing it. I did. It was a fun show. Got me excited. But I hope it did some of you as well.
James O'Reilly, other than guard and safety, what other position battles are you looking forward to in camp? For me, it's receivers and one linebacker spot. Not that I wouldn't love to see the light come on.
You're talking about Maris. I mean, I get that too. But I still think the battle is going to be important, right?
Sure.
To me, some of the battles I'm looking forward to, obviously, who's going to play where at receiver. That's going to be fun. Guard, right guard to be one, obviously. But some of the other battles are like, who's going to be the next guy in as part of the rotation?
Yep.
Right. Like, who's going to be the number 2 back? There you go. Right. Yep. Exactly, Vince. Number 2 back. Who's going to be in my rotation on the edge, defensive end?
Yep.
Who's going to be the 2 safeties to start? And who's going to be the guy that rotates in? Who's the number 3? Who's the number 3 corner?
Yep.
Is it Clarence Lewis or Jaden Mickey? Those are the battles that I'm really looking forward to.
Sure.
This year. And not even just on, it's kind of battles, but which veterans get pushed by younger players to say, hey, you better bring it today.
Sure.
Right. Like that's also something I love to see. And I'm looking forward to seeing. So that's going to be a lot of fun too. Cause imagine if Notre Dame comes out in the first 3 games, Audrick's doing okay. But Jadarian comes out like doing his best Dexter Williams from Fit 17 impression where he's averaging like 9 yards a carry. Like, don't think Audrick's not going to see that and be like, okay, not that he's going to be nervous, but it's more of a, I can't let this dude be the dude that's balling. I got to step up and do what I do.
Get off my lawn.
Right?
I got this.
Yeah. Anything you can do, I can do better type of thing. Like, okay, and then some poor soul for Ohio State suffers because, Audrick face plants him because he's like, okay, I can't get shown up in my own house. You know what I mean? So you want to see that kind of stuff too. And it's even though it's not a position battle, it's kind of like, hey, I better step up and bring it today. Where Jordan Patelho knows he can't take a step back because if he does, man, these young bucks over here are balling out. Like I got to ball out too. That's what I love to see. Gabriel Rubio may not be in position to like beat out Riley Mills, but if he's balling out, then Riley's going to know he has to ball out. Right. Because, hey, I got to justify being this guy that gets these snaps. That's what makes you good, man. Like at Georgia, if you're a defensive lineman at Georgia and you're a starter, you better bring it every day. Because if you don't, there's some young buck chomping at the bit that's as good, if not better than you. And that's partly why you see them be as good as they are. I love that kind of competition, Vince. I do. And I think we're going to see more of that at Notre Dame this year. I really do.
Punter. I want to know who's going to win the punting battle.
Yeah, good call.
I'm being sarcastic to a degree. That's to a degree. Yeah,
it's
right.
Bryce McPherson and Ben Krim. We don't know who that's going to be. Because here, to your point,
super high on Bryce McPherson when he came in.
Yeah,
super high.
We'll see what he does. He's had some injuries and stuff like that that's held him back. I'll say this too. John Sott was one of the most money players from Notre Dame that didn't get talked about a lot.
Yep.
He was so good last year. That's important. That kind of thing's important, man.
Field position's important, and I'll tell you that right now. Field position is incredibly important. My son's high school coach told him yesterday. He's like, "Look," he goes, "I don't care who's kicking extra points." He goes, "Anybody can kick an extra point." He goes, "What I care about is punting." He's like, "That's what I need you to be able to do. So you better figure out how to be a punter, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera." But like, even at this level, even at the high school level, man, like field position is incredibly important, So,
Yep. He ain't wrong. Ain't wrong. That's very good advice. Because, hey, we can just go for 2, man.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Although I did see one high school coach around here who used to kick field goals from wherever he was because I guess it counted as a punt.
Because of the rule.
Which was really dumb. The first good team he played, it was Penn. They returned 2 of those for touchdowns.
Yes, they did. And it was, I'm pretty sure it was with kid that went to Notre Dame. Went to Idaho.
Paul Walla. No. This is way back when Garrett Dieter and David Perkins were
Oh,
playing for
Perkins.
Washington.
Okay, so that was before Moala's time.
It's before Moala, yeah.
Yeah.
They didn't have any Notre Dame players on that team.
No, they didn't.
Which
But
made
they
it
had
even
really
worse.
they had really smart coaches.
Yes, they did.
Who are still the coaching staff now. This is another conversation.
Yes, they did.
Don't forget to block out that Friday. We're going to a game together.
Okay, sounds good to me. Just got to remind me.
I know. I keep thinking to myself, I got to remind him, but it's too early. It's too early.
Just
all right,
wait till the week of.
I know, right?
Good. Yeah.
Tommy Guns, on a scale of 1 to 10, what level would you say the Safeties played at last year, and what is your expected number for this year?
That's a good way of putting it. I'd say 6.
Yeah, that's exactly my number.
You know, what is your expected number this year? Man, my expected number's 6. I mean, they got to prove it, right? No, my hopeful number this year is like 8. You know, that's where they're getting that because like what I don't think they have is even like Xavier Watts, like they don't have like a Caleb Downs. They don't have a Kyle Hamilton from 2020.
Sure.
They don't have Harrison Smith from his last 2 years, 10 and 11, like where he was a star. They don't have that. Even Xavier Watts. Xavier Watts is more a Lohi Gilman, maybe even a better version of Lohi Gilman, who plays in the National Football League, right? He's a football player.
Right.
But there's a difference between that and Harrison Smith.
Sure.
Right. So you'd need that to be like a 9 or a 10. You know, the 8 for me is more about the production level, the clutch. I mean, you got a 5th-year senior. No, I'm sorry. You have a 6th-year senior and 2 seniors in your safety rotation. Like it's time to step up now, right? It's time to start making more plays. And I think they have guys capable of making more plays. What they don't have is Caleb Downs, Kyle Hamilton, 2020 version, Harrison Smith, you know, that type of guy. They don't have that.
Right.
They don't have that.
Yep. Agreed.
I got to ask this one, Vince, because it's for you. Vince, how comfy and good looking is that white pullover?
Dude, this is one of my favorite items. I'm not going to lie. I wear it to my other job quite frequently. I wear it anytime I don't happen to have a IB t-shirt on, which is today, but I love it. It is just light enough where I'm not overly hot, but it's heavy enough that it does the job that it needs to do. I freaking love this thing, man. I was pushing for Brian to get a quarter zip for a long time, and he waited because he wanted to make sure it was the right one, and he knocked it out of the park. Like I love this so much. So much.
And I had to do some research on it to make sure it was being made at a place that would allow us to morally feel good about selling it.
So I love this thing.
Yeah,
I wear it
very comfortable. And there's also a gray and a navy blue version of that, which y'all have seen me wear on the show.
Yep.
White, white's not my color.
I know. I may have to jump in and get either the navy or the gray at some point, but I love the white one, man. It is awesome.
Yeah, just let me know. You know, I'll get that.
T Guns, who has more interceptions? One of Hart or Morrison, whoever has more, or the safety group?
Ooh, I'm hoping it's the safety group.
Right.
And here's why I say that. If it's the safety group, it means that Morrison and Hart are dominant in coverage. And, you know, you're not throwing at them. And that's great for the defense. If they're just like, man, screw it, we're just not throwing at these guys.
Right.
You know, and the safeties are making a lot of picks. That's great. That's great for them. It's kind of like I pointed this out in the show yesterday, or was it the day before? I forget, Vince. But, you know, like Todd Light had 8. No, actually, I was talking with somebody the other day. I don't think I said this in the show, but like Todd Light had 8 interceptions in 1989. Right. Or was it 1988? I think it was 1989 because he didn't play in 86. Let me just look this up real quick. I think he had I think it was 1989. He was an All-American. He had 8 interceptions. He was an All-American next year and he had 2 interceptions. That was 89. And I don't think he had, I'd have to go look. I don't know what he had in 1988. It wasn't a lot, but 1989 had 8 picks and he was an All-American. He had 2 the next year was All-American. Well, why did Todd Light only have 2 interceptions in 1990? Because nobody threw at him.
Not throwing at him.
Not throwing at him. And so, you know, that factored into it, obviously a great deal. There's no way, I don't think there's any way Benjamin Morrison ever matches his freshman number in interceptions. I just don't think it's going to happen. Why? because I don't think people are going to throw at him enough in those ways for him to get 6 picks again in a year. And so I just don't see that happening. And
this is kind of
the safeties are making it.
Do you take the individual or do you take the field? You know what I mean? That's kind of what this feels like. And I'm going to take the field in hopes that those guys not only step up their game, like we were talking about earlier, but also I just think Morrison and Hart are going to be so good that they're just not going to get as many opportunities. So,
because like the field. Vince, if Benjamin Morrison had 6, if he plays a 4-year career, which guys used to do all the time, and it's going to make sense why I'm saying this. If he would have done that, he'd be in a situation where he would have 24 interceptions, which would rank 4th all time. Right? Like Dre Bly played 3 years at North Carolina. He had 20 career interceptions in 3 years. That's phenomenal. He only had over 6 once because he made 11 as a freshman, and then nobody didn't throw on it 5 and 4. That's still a lot for the position, but he never got to 6 again. Right. I also threw an interception to Dre Bly, FYI, my first high school game.
Congratulations.
A scrimmage against Western Branch. So I know what it's like to be intercepted by Dre Bly. I do.
That's great.
But yeah, so I mean, they just didn't throw at him enough. Did Dre Bly get worse his next 2 years? No, of course not. There's no way they're going to give him a chance to have 11 interceptions. So yeah. Now, if they do have that number again, they are an unreal cornerback. Because that means, actually, you know what, Vince? You can make the case that the opposite of what I said is true. Because if the corners get thrown at enough to have that more interceptions than what they had last year. Now, this isn't a response necessarily to Tommy's question, because they could have 3 interceptions and still be more than the safeties. That's not what I'm kind of changing. Like if Cam and or Benjamin are both kind of getting close to Benjamin's number from last year, then that means teams are still throwing at the corners because it's too risky to throw to the safeties, which means one, if not 2 things are true. One is the pass rush is too good. They don't have time to get the ball down the field to attack on some of the more vertical routes against safeties. And B, it's because the safeties have made a lot of plays and now they're having to go back outside. Those are all good signs. But
absolutely.
I just don't see that happening. I could see like Cam with like 3 or 4 and Benjamin with like 2 or 3.
Sure.
Something like that. And then I hope the safeties are still more than that, is my hope.
Individually, yeah.
Yep.
Oh, this is the new one. Mark Avalone. With increased player rotations, how does Notre Dame handle who makes coverage calls between the cornerbacks, safeties, and even the linebackers?
It's a position thing, Mark. That's a good question, but that's why you make it a position. So whoever's the mic makes the calls, right? So whoever's the whatever field safety or whatever certain look. So there's going to be certain calls that are going to be there, have to be made by certain positions, no matter who's there. It's like whoever the center is, you need that guy making calls. Whoever the quarterback is, he needs to be able to make protection checks, things like that. So you just make it to where it's part of the Mike's responsibility. And then you just say, hey, look, if Nolan, if you're going to be in the game of Mike, you've got to be able to make those calls. Drake, if you're in the game of Mike, you've got to be able to make those calls. So now the other thing you could potentially do is some of those calls, you kind of just make the call, right? And maybe you have like a will or a safety that's got to make that check, but you don't really want to be in that situation. If a Mike can't make the call, then you can't put him in the game.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it's just the reality of it. So
absolutely,
it comes down to positions. Yeah.
And I don't know specifically about Notre Dame, but I know that they have obviously calls that come in from the sideline as well. And sometimes that, sometimes they can take that off of the player and then they can just call it in from the sideline. But when you want to have somebody in there that can potentially override if it's a bad look, all of those different things. And so, it just all depends.
Yep.
Tommy, which safety does IB feel like the IB crew would be able to score the most TDs on from the 8-yard line? Route is your choice. You're playing receiver with Hartman at QB. So, in other words, we're lining up at wide receiver.
I would hope no one.
Yeah, I hope everybody on that roster could cover all of us.
I mean, if any of us could score a touchdown against one of the Notre Dame safeties, even when I was in my prime and was a college receiver, I was a Division III college receiver. If I could score touchdowns on Notre Dame safeties, there's a big problem. Big problem. And I don't care if Tom Brady in his prime is the quarterback, Peyton Manning, John Elway. But the only person I can maybe do is like John Elway because he just threw it through the hands of the other guy and I could still catch it. You know? But no.
The only way this works is if they're playing, you know, a hash
if
safety.
It's a blown coverage and they forget to cover me.
Exactly. It's a hash safety. I'm playing in the slot and it's from the 8-yard line. And as soon as I get to the goal line, I turn around and there's the ball.
And
like
he fell down.
Coming to me? Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah.
There's something.
No.
Yeah.
No.
And I don't want to feel what the hit would be like coming from behind either.
No.
Because I don't know that I'd get up at this point.
That would be bad.
I'm too
in
old.
my prime, I might have been able to make a jump ball fade. I was pretty good at that. I had pretty good hands. So like if the ball was thrown perfectly, I might be able to make like a jump ball kind of back shoulder type of things. Pretty good at that. Like when I was coaching, I would challenge my players that we would have one-handed end zone catches. So, but like I didn't want them doing one-handed stuff unless it was being part of a drill.
Yeah.
So we would work on it to where, you know, you would basically have to act as if like your other hand was being held.
Okay.
So you can only use your right hand or you can only use your left hand. So then I would do it with them and I would usually win because I had really good hands. But yeah, maybe that in my prime. But right now, dude, I just pulled 3 muscles thinking about running a fade route right now.
Even from the 8-yard line.
Yes. From the 8-inch line.
Yeah.
I just pulled 2 muscles.
Oh, man, that's great. Tommy, how many of the safeties are faster than Jack Kaiser? I don't know this one.
Well, Ramon. Maybe Xavier. Maybe Ben Minnick. Maybe. So at the most 3.
Okay.
DJ's not. Ramon's not. I mean, Antonio Carter's not. And Adon Schuler's not. And that's not because they're slow. It's because Jack Kaiser's really fast.
Yeah.
Because remember, Jalen Sneed ran a 4.54 at a camp his senior year, and he is, at least as a freshman, was not faster than Jack Kaiser. Jack Kaiser is probably the fastest linebacker they have. Not saying something because they have some guys who can run. He just has really short arms and he's just not real big, but he can run.
Right.
I mean, you saw him in high school, Vince. I mean, that kid was I don't care what level of play you to put him in. I mean, it was silly the level he was at, right?
Correct. He was at 1A, which is the absolute smallest, like one stoplight in the town type of school. Right. And so they're playing other small schools.
You could have put him in the Indy League and he still would have been dominant. He still would have been Mr. Football in Ohio. I mean, he was a phenomenal football.
He was in Indiana. He was an Indiana guy, wasn't he?
Isn't that what I said?
You said Ohio.
Did I?
Mm-hmm.
Because I said you could put him in Indianapolis.
And then you said he'd be the best player in Ohio.
Oh, Indiana. Sorry.
It's all good.
I didn't say he'd have been like the Mr. All. What would they call it?
They call him Mr. Football.
Yeah, he still would have been that.
Oh,
he still would have been that.
He put up like 7,000 yards or something ridiculous like that.
He had like 70 touchdowns one year. It was just
ridiculous. It was just absolutely ridiculous.
I'm going to see if I can find his high school numbers somewhere.
Because somebody put it on the board, I think, fairly recently.
Yeah. As a senior, Jack had 18 passing touchdowns, 44 rushing touchdowns. So that's 62, right? And then he also had, I think he had some special teams. They don't show his special teams numbers here. Actually, here we go. Defensively, he had, let's see how many touchdowns he had on defense. Scoring. Okay, we'll just go to this way. So as a senior, he had 46 total touchdowns. And then you add the 18 passing. So that's 64, right? He had, put it like this, and then he scored 36 conversions.
Right. He obviously didn't kick it.
Was he the kicker? Hold on a second.
I don't know. He probably
he was
everything.
A place kicker. He kicked 36 extra points.
Okay. Yeah, why not? Why not?
No. Yeah, so he had 44 rushing touchdowns as a senior, 1 touchdown on a fumble return, 1 touchdown on an interception return. As a junior, he had a punt return for a touchdown. He had 2 punt returns as a touchdowns as a freshman. He had a kick return touchdown as a sophomore. So Jack Kaiser in high school scored 145 touchdowns by himself, and then also passed for 59 more touchdowns. That kid accounted for 200 touchdowns in high school. I don't care what level you're at, Vince. That's
Right.
stupid.
Seriously.
That's just dumb. He had 3,771 passing yards, and he had 7,364 rushing yards.
So he had over 10,000.
He had over 11,000 yards of offense. And then for, what's in giggles, as a true freshman, he had 9 catches for 122 yards. So, okay, sure. I mean, that's just absurd. That's just really silly. So, and he had 11,257 career yards of offense, rushing, passing, receiving. He also had 485 career yards and kick returns, 914 career yards in punt returns, and 289 career yards in interception returns. I'm actually going to add this up. So just on returns, Jack Kaiser had 1,688 yards.
So he had
add those 12, to his offensive yards, and he had 12,945 yards.
So 13,000 yards
touchdowns.
Of all
I don't care what level of football you're playing at. That's just stupid. That's just dumb. And it's not like he did most of it passing. Like Everett Golson had over 12,000 yards of offense in high school as well. But it's because he threw for a ton of yards. He threw for over 10,000 yards in his career. He did this and only threw for 3,000 yards.
Right.
You know what I mean?
That's not the chunk of the yardage.
No. Most of that he did with his own legs, not somebody else's legs.
Correct.
You know what I'm saying?
I would challenge people to walk 13,000 yards.
Yes. Yeah. He was nuts. Do you know, Ryan pointed this to me. Do you know the most touchdown passes that's ever been thrown by a high school quarterback?
No.
Do you know what it is? You know who it is, first of all?
It's
from Rico Flores' high school, although it was before Rico's time. It's Jake Browning. You remember him?
I know the name.
Kid that played at Washington a few years ago.
Okay.
I'm trying to find the number here. He had, where's his senior year? Where's the touchdowns? Do they not have it there? Give me a second. They got it like blacked out for some reason. That's really weird. It's really strange.
Confidential
information. Yeah, is it like a state secret or something like that? Let me see here. Let me find Jake Browning, Washington. It was like something like 90 touchdown passes. Just nuts. Absolutely nuts.
In 1 year.
Yeah, in 1 year.
Oh my gosh.
So let's look see if they have it this way. So here we go. They have 91 as a senior in high school. He threw 91 touchdowns. Wow. It was like in 16 games. Like he threw 7, 6, 7, 7, 5, 3, 8, 4, 3, 6, 8, 6, 6, 6, 3, 6.
He had 2 games with 8 touchdown passes.
Yeah, and he rushed for 5.
Good.
So yeah,
Lord. Responsible for 96 touchdowns.
Yeah, he had 75 the year before. I mean, that's just basically every time you get in the red zone or anywhere, you're still throwing it.
Yes.
That's what that is. He had 10 touchdowns in a game as a sophomore. Like they won 68-28. Like that means every touchdown they scored was a touchdown. But why was he in the game?
Exactly.
At that point in time. But yeah,
there are
so he had
out there that
91, 70 something, and 60 something touchdowns in his career.
Jeez.
So, yeah, that's just ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and had that great sophomore year at Washington too. Like he led him to the college football playoff. Remember, he had John Ross
1 year that Washington went.
Yeah, he had John Ross and he had Dante Pettis as his receivers, and he just never lived up to that again. He had 43 touchdown passes as a sophomore, threw for 3,400 yards. The next year, he threw for 2,700 yards, 19 touchdowns, 5 picks. The next year, as a senior, he threw for 3,192, 16 touchdowns, and 10 picks. Just was never the same player after that year for some reason. Don't know why. Just was never the same guy. It's interesting.
Yeah, no doubt. Back up. Do you expect any more What?
For those listening via podcast, that's literally the guy's name. It's BAAAAAACCKKUPPPP.
I had to say it how it's written.
Vince is showing respect to the guy's name.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you expect any more transfers in or out before kickoff in Ireland?
There might be some guys that leave. I mean, there might be a guy that leaves because he gets beat out in fall camp. That I can't rule that out. I don't know who that would be. I don't have anyone in mind. It's part of the game.
Yeah,
just part of the game.
Sure.
No one's going to transfer in at this point in time. That's not already transferred. And then they've got some transfers we haven't talked about that are like Cole Aubrey. They transferred from Penn. They had another kid from Princeton. They had another kid from Penn that transferred in who had a sack for Penn. I mean, he's more coming here for school. Good, scout team guy, not a guy that's going to help. There'll be some guys like that, but that are already on the team that you may not have heard of. I think Grant Risto is the kid's name, but no one's going to transfer in. I think all the portal guys have kind of figured out where they're going to go if they're going to go anywhere. And there's still a lot of kids that don't have homes. That's the sad thing. There's a lot of kids that jumped in the portal that don't have homes anymore.
There's a problem with the portal.
They don't have football homes anymore.
Yeah. Because now they're not playing football anywhere and they're not going to school. So, Caleb Collins, predict your first team all Americans for every position. Holy smokies. That's a lot.
Predict your first team all Americans for every position. I have no clue. Like I'd have to sit down and think about that. Let's do this. Who predict all Americans for Notre Dame this year?
Okay.
Right. Because I could give you like a cursory list of some names, but I haven't done the study I would need to do to pick ones at every position.
Are we talking just first teamers?
I'll say this. Let's pick an All-American, one first team All-American per position. Predict one guy that will be a first team All-American per position. So we don't have to do 5 offensive linemen, just do one. So quarterback, I still think Caleb Williams will probably be a first team All-American. Now he may not win the Heisman again.
Sure.
It's a different deal.
But his stats will be good.
I still predict him.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. I agree.
So running back, obviously you have Blake Corum's a popular pick. I've seen some people with Travion Henderson, some guys like that. Vince, anyone that you
Corum was the first one that came to mind for me.
I think the problem with Blake Corum is because he's coming off the injury.
Right.
I could see Michigan taking advantage of the fact that they have such a good running back in Donovan Edwards to not overload him too much this year. I could see
Michigan's that smart.
Yeah. I mean, dude, they've been to back-to-back playoffs. So
just asking
appearances.
I'm just asking the question.
I think they would. I think they would do something like that.
Okay.
I'm gonna go outside the box a little bit and pick a guy that I loved coming out of high school. I'm gonna go with Quinshon Judkins. It's gonna be my pick for a first team All-American running back. Okay. So I think he's gonna build on last year. Archer, I see that Archer just now put him in the chat as well. Wide receiver, that's an easy one. It's Marvin Harrison Jr. That's a really easy one, Vince.
Yeah. I mean, he's got the hype to go with it. I mean,
and he's really phenomenal.
Yeah,
absolutely freaking phenomenal.
Yeah.
Tight end. Who's your pick at tight end, Vince? Are there any good tight ends coming back this year? Anyone? Brock Bowers?
I mean, Brock Bowers is obviously the one that comes to mind.
If it's not Brock Bowers, a dark horse for me would be a Rondé Gadsden at Syracuse. He was really good last year, and he is a tight end. Offensive line, Joe Alt. That's an easy one.
Yep, I'm taking Joe Alt and running with him.
Yep. All right, Vince. Here's where it gets a little bit tougher. Okay, let's go D line.
Okay.
Who? I see you got your trusty old magazine out there. Let's go D line.
I'm not going to hide it.
It's all good. You can look at it. People be silly to just think you can pull all that off the top of your head. I love the fact that Caleb thinks we can do it. I think if he's healthy, I really think Jared Verse is going to be a stud this year because he's going to have a lot more help this year than he did last year at Florida State. So that's an easy one. That's a little bit of a lazy one, Vince. Anybody else that kind of stands out to you that
I'm looking at some of these names and nobody's jumping out at me that I'm like, yeah, that guy. You know what I mean? Like, Yep.
Yeah. So I'm going to cheat a little bit and go to that one.
All right, let's go
defensive
tackles too, or are we just doing
defensive line?
Okay.
Yeah, just defensive line.
All
right, Vince. Here we're gonna have a little bit of fun on this one. Okay, because I'm gonna pull one up that people are gonna be like, you're out of your mind.
I've got my linebacker for sure.
Okay. Who's your linebacker?
I'm just a big fan of Tommy Eichenberg. just watching him play, and he's in the right place all the time. He's a gamer. I know he's from Ohio State. I get it, but
hey, look, he's Liam's little brother, so I'm always,
yeah,
I
mean,
I want him to only have one not good game next year. That's it.
Absolutely.
I only want him to want to have one game that he doesn't play great.
Yep.
I'm going JD Bertrand.
Okay.
It's my prediction.
Okay.
I'm going to have one bold prediction here. And then let's go safety and then corner. Let's just have a little bit of fun here. Corner, I'm going Benjamin Morrison. If I had to go somebody else, I really like Caleb King. I do. The kid from Penn State. I think he's really good. Safety's a little bit tougher for me, Vince, because I'm not as locked in on who all the best safeties are coming back next season. So safety's a little bit tougher for me.
A lot of underclassmen.
I really like Malachi Starks from Georgia. I could see him breaking out as a sophomore and being an All-American type. He was really good as a freshman last year at Georgia. That's probably one I'm leaning towards a little bit. I don't know if he's on there. If he's on people's, he might be the one that you're looking at. I don't know. He probably is like second or third, something like that.
You say Starks?
Starks, yeah.
He's 7th or 5th on this list.
Okay. Yeah, I think he's going to have a really good year, and he's going to have the preseason recognition because of the name and all that other kind of stuff. But that's my pick at safety.
Okay, I like it.
So yeah, those are some of my predicts for All-Americans, Vince. So
cool.
And that's gonna do it, man.
Man, that's a tough. Like, you could do a whole show on that, like with some research and things like that. We could do an entire show on that. But that's a great question. Great question.
We had this one real quick. Will Indy said, could Bob Diaco still be a successful coordinator in Power 5? I don't think so, because I think Bob Diaco was really smart at that one defense. I don't think he had the ability to adjust and coach more of a modern game. So I don't think so. Not at a Power 5, no. Not at a Power 5. Not a good Power 5 anyway. So, yeah. All right, Vince, take us out of here, man.
Cool, man. Well, thanks, everybody, for joining us on another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the notification bell, and share with your family and friends. We've got there's a show on tonight, the IB Nation Sports Talk. There's a guest coming on. Sean wouldn't tell me who it is. He says it's a big surprise. So we're all going to have to find out together tonight at 6 o'clock. And then tomorrow we've got, you know what day it is. It's the Friday free-for-all mailbag, and Ryan and I are going to
have something special going on tomorrow. We'll see.
Okay.
On it.
That's a tease.
Be part of the mailbag. Yeah.
It's a tease. So hit that notification bell so you know what's coming up, folks. That's what you got to do. I'm teased. I don't even know what's happening. This is awesome.
Yeah, I know. So, I just texted Sean. He better tell me. It's like, hey, you do not tell Vince, but I'm the one that signs them checks, baby. So I want to know. Who's coming on tonight. Yeah, but we may have a little something. We're working on having a little something special at the beginning of tomorrow's show.
Beautiful.
So yeah, we'll see.
There you go.
Of course, you and I on Saturday, 1 o'clock on Saturday.
For a normal scheduled show, we're going to break down the tight ends, our final position group breakdown. So lots of shows coming up. Lots of fun, so make sure you come back and join us. So for Brian, I'm Vince. Thanks for joining us once again on the Irish Breakdown podcast.
That's it.